Chapter 761, The Visit. Atticus Blaine had a slightly slender build, a handsome face with sharp features, soft gray hair, and a pair of striking lavender eyes that were both deep and radiant. Louise blinked hard, staring at the young man before her, her bloodless lips parting in surprise. Mr. Blaine. Without warning, another man emerged from the shadows behind Atticus. He was a tall, imposing black man. From her professional experience, Louise could tell at a glance that he was a man who rarely smiled. His sharp demeanor was intimidating. Louise was startled by the sudden appearance of Kingsley, who wore a serious expression, and Atticus released her arm. Observing the Muggle girl who had retreated a few steps, Atticus offered a gentle smile. "This is Kingsley. Don't be afraid, Miss Ondare. We mean no harm. A handsome appearance often makes it easier to gain trust." Although Louise was not familiar with the gray-haired man in front of her, she immediately believed his words. "Do you know this this lady, Mr. Blaine?" Atticus glanced at the girl, who looked at him timidly, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "Not really an acquaintance. We just met once, on a street outside the alley at the entrance of the ministry. Do you remember me, Miss Ondare?" Louise bit her lip and nodded slightly. "Just call me Louise, and you're Atticus Blaine." "Louise." Atticus pursed his lips. "May I ask, what is the relationship between this Fraser and you?" "He's my brother." How could she forget? Atticus Blaine. This was the first time she had initiated a conversation with a complete stranger on the street, only to be rejected outright and decisively. For a lady, such an embarrassment would linger with her for life. Although her dark, shining eyes were still clouded from being abruptly awakened, she gradually regained her composure and had already drawn her wand, assuming a defensive stance. As footsteps approached, she stopped outside the door of a ward, the haze in her eyes completely dissipated. She moved to Hermione's bedside, casting a vigilant gaze out the window. As soon as he entered the ward, Sirius bypassed Tonks and went directly to Hermione's bed. Atticus shook his head slightly and sighed, his tone heavy. The torturous night finally ended with the faint light of dawn. The pale green morning light filtered through the high window set in the oak-paneled wall opposite the door, illuminating the hospital bed and gradually casting its glow on Hermione's pale, bloodless face as she slept. "Louise, I'm glad to meet you again, but for you, this is truly unfortunate. In this situation—" Louise quickly uttered the gray-haired man's name, but for some reason her cheeks flushed slightly, and she clamped her mouth shut once more. What a wonderful coincidence. In the cold alley, the girl's sobs, full of heartache and sorrow, echoed. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, 5th floor, Magical Injuries Department. "I'm in Albania, who?" A recliner sat next to the hospital bed. On it, Tonks was sleeping in her wizard robe. However, when rapid footsteps suddenly approached from the corridor outside, Tonks, who had been breathing steadily, abruptly opened her eyes. "Fraser," Louise covered her mouth. What happened?" After being stunned for several seconds, Louise regained her composure. She immediately understood what Mr. Blaine was referring to. The slight blush on her cheeks vanished instantly. She stared at Atticus Blaine with wide eyes, but he did not meet her gaze, so Louise turned her attention back to Blaine. The tall man standing behind Mr. Kingsley exuded a stern aura, his head bowed and his features heavy with concern. The sound of a slightly urgent knock on the door, do, broke the tension, and Tonks visibly relaxed. She scratched at her hair, which had become dry from lack of sleep, and with a thought, her brown locks turned black. Atticus Blaine and Kingsley exchanged glances, each seeing the faint anger reflected in the other's deep eyes. "We teamed up with the strikers in France for a mission," Atticus began. "I received a letter from Miss Bones last night and rushed back. How is Hermione?" "She's been asleep since I arrived," Kingsley replied, "but Dumbledore said she might wake up today." Since Sirius joined the Auror office, he and Kingsley had become partners, while Kingsley took on more of a leadership role. Sirius looked exhausted, likely from walking through the morning dew. His hair was damp, with a few strands clinging to his forehead, but he paid them no mind. His gray eyes, filled with anger, were fixed on Hermione's pale face, monitoring her weak breathing. His fists were clenched tightly at his sides. "Ms. Bones didn't provide many details," Sirius said, his voice tense. She only mentioned that Hermione was seriously injured while receiving a package in Hogsmeade. Is there any new information? What happened? Sirius's breathing quickened as he looked at Hermione, who had been staying at his home just over a week ago. His frown deepened, etching lines into his forehead. Nobody knows for sure, Sirius, Tonks whispered. But I heard that Atticus and Dumbledore were furious. After Ms. Umbridge returned from Hogwarts, she nearly destroyed half her office. The minister didn't look pleased either. I guess they got a bit riled up at Hogwarts. Sirius smirked slightly. Fudge and Umbridge likely wanted to distance the Ministry of Magic from any responsibility. Knowing Atticus, he wouldn't be giving Fudge and Umbridge any favors. For a brief moment, Sirius felt a sense of schadenfreude, but it quickly faded, leaving only worry on his face. Ms. Bones had specifically mentioned in her letter that Harry was unharmed in the attack, likely due to her awareness of Sirius's connection to Harry Potter. However, Sirius knew Harry wouldn't be pleased about the situation. It's time, Tonks announced, breaking Sirius's worried thoughts. She picked up a robe from the couch and retrieved a bottle containing a golden potion from her pocket. Dumbledore brought this, she said, gently helping Hermione sit up in her hospital clothes. She needs 3 tablespoons every 6 hours. This is enough for 2 days. Snape will deliver more by tomorrow evening. Could you help me? Sirius grimaced at the mention of Snape's name, but took the silver spoon from the bedside table. Carefully tilting the bottle, he brought the potion, with its dancing golden flames, to Hermione's pale lips. After taking the potion, color returned to her face, and her breathing grew slightly stronger. To avoid disturbing Hermione's rest, Sirius and Tonks ceased their conversation. Around 9 o'clock, the hospital's therapists arrived to check on Hermione. They administered some nutrient solution and applied a pungent violet sticky potion to her right arm before hurrying to the next ward. Get some sleep, Tonks advised, noticing Sirius's exhaustion. We need to keep our energy up to handle whatever comes next. With the threat of assassinations looming at any moment, Sirius was persuaded by Tonks' assertion and nodded in agreement. All right, I'll just rest for 2 hours. If Hermione wakes up... Suddenly, a voice interrupted. Excuse me. Startled, Sirius and Tonks turned their attention to the closed door of the ward. A gruff, aged voice resonated from behind it. I heard that a young witch named Hermione Granger was brought here. She's a classmate of my grandson, so I came to check on her well-being. End of this chapter. Chapter 762, Awakening. It took Hermione several minutes to open her eyes and realize she was still alive. Everything before her was bathed in a hazy light and shadow, making it difficult to see clearly. She felt so weak that even turning her head was a challenge, and the sounds around her were a mere buzzing in her ears. Despite her desire to understand what was happening, she was helpless to discern who the 3 people beside her bed were, or what they were saying. Hermione lay quietly, her gaze fixed on the rotating crystal bubbles under the ceiling that illuminated the ward. She had never seen such bubbles with a halo before, indicating she was not in the Hogwarts dormitory or the campus hospital. She was in a completely unfamiliar place. How did she get here, and why? Her memory ended with Professor Atticus Blaine appearing beside her, reassuring her not to worry, as he could save her. Thinking of the young professor, Hermione felt her weak heart beat with renewed strength, and warmth spread from her heart throughout her body. This warm current seemed to accelerate her recovery. The murky white light before her eyes began to fade, and the dreamlike voices in her ears became clearer. One of the 3 people beside her bed seemed eager to help her up, but another slapped the back of their hand and reprimanded them sharply. Was it Professor McGonagall? Hermione's dry lips moved, trying to speak, but only a faint murmur escaped. Suddenly, several people in dark robes entered the narrow room, ushering out the 3 by her bedside. They removed the cover from her body and unbuttoned her clothes, leaving her exposed to the air. Congratulations on your survival, Hermione, a St. Mungo's healer solemnly said to Tonks and Sirius. Hermione's back was cushioned by thick, fluffy pillows. Although she had already guessed where she was, she nodded slightly. How long have I been asleep, Sirius? She asked. She'd better get out of bed and walk every day, the healer advised. This will help her body stay active, but the time should not exceed half an hour because she is still very weak. "Oh, you finally woke up," Sirius said, masking his sadness with a smile as he sat beside her. "I guess you don't know where this is. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. To be honest, I've spent quite a bit of time here, but it must be your first visit, right?" A stern-looking old witch in a green robe, adorned with moth-eaten fox fur and a pointed hat with a stuffed vulture, stood nearby. Her stylish outfit seemed familiar to Hermione, though her injury had dulled her usually sharp mind. Hearing that the Ministry of Magic had sent someone to protect her, Hermione felt a pang of panic. Was she still in danger? Nonetheless, she nodded gratefully to the young lady who seemed approachable. "Thank you," Hermione said. "Sirius," Hermione called out softly. It wasn't until half an hour later that the three people waiting outside the door were allowed back in. In addition, her right arm probably won't function properly for now. You need to be mindful of this, the healer added. A strong sense of shame filled Hermione's heart. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the scene, but the sensation of her delicate skin being touched only became more pronounced. This feeling of shame hastened her recovery of bodily control, and she curled her toes under the quilt. "Tonks is an auror with the Ministry," Sirius explained. "She's partnered with me, and we were sent here together." "To keep you safe," Sirius explained. "Probably less than 20 hours. It was Tonks who answered the question. Seeing Hermione looking at her a little cautiously, Tonks smiled brightly. "Hello, Hermione. I'm Nymphadora Tonks, but you can call me Tonks." The tall old lady standing next to Tonks nodded as the therapists and nursing staff left the beds. In this hospital, many patients were waiting for treatment. Hermione, leaning on the bed, nodded with difficulty towards the old witch. She guessed that the old witch might be an official of the Minis, Try of Magic, and the boss of Sirius and Tonks, as she felt a sense of familiarity from seeing her photos in the Daily Prophet. Just as Hermione was hesitating to ask the old lady's name, Sirius, noticing her confusion, smiled and explained, "This is Lady Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother." "Thank you, Sirius," Mrs. Longbottom said, casting a glance at him. "I was going to introduce myself." The moment Hermione heard the name Longbottom, two thoughts popped into her mind. First, she realized why the old lady's attire seemed familiar. She had indeed seen it last year in Remus's class, where a boggart had transformed into Professor Snape wearing this very costume when facing Neville. The second realization was even more unsettling. "Mrs. Longbottom?" Hermione's weak face turned pale. "Neville? Oh, don't be nervous, Hermione," Sirius reassured her immediately. "Neville was not attacked. Augusta is here to take care of him. By the way, Harry and Ron are also fine." "There's nothing you can't say, Sirius," Mrs. Longbottom interjected with a firm tone, glancing at him with dissatisfaction. "I'm here to look after my son and daughter-in-law in the hospital. I heard from the therapist that you were being sent here, so I came to see you. Neville has told me a lot about you. You've helped him through some difficult times. Yes, I understand now. You are exactly as Neville described, a kind girl." Hermione whispered her thanks again, but her mind was racing. Mrs. Longbottom was here to care for her son and daughter-in-law. Weren't they Neville's parents? Did Neville not tell you about his parents? Mrs. Longbottom's sharp gaze seemed to pierce through Hermione's thoughts, and she frowned. Sirius and Tonks exchanged glances, but remained silent on the matter. Hermione was certain Neville had never mentioned his parents to her, Harry or Ron, but Mrs. Longbottom's tone suggested there was more to the story. "Oh, I must write to Neville and ask," Mrs. Longbottom said angrily. "This is not something to be ashamed of. He should be proud. His parents sacrificed their sanity and health, and he should never feel ashamed of them." Mrs. Longbottom looked at Hermione with pride. "My son and daughter-in-law are also aurors. They are highly respected in the wizarding world for bravely standing up against the Dark Lord when he terrorized the wizarding community. And then—" "Mrs. Longbottom!" A nurse rushed in, her face filled with urgency. She interrupted Mrs. Longbottom, grabbing her hand without explanation. "Hurry, Mrs. Longbottom. Alice has woken up. She's looking for you everywhere, crying in fear, and won't let anyone near her." Mrs. Longbottom was whisked away before she could say goodbye. Watching her leave, Sirius and his companions looked troubled. "What happened?" Hermione asked, struggling to support her sliding body with her one good arm, her voice tinged with dizziness. Sirius pursed his lips, hesitating before he continued. Well, it's a long story. Since Augusta is willing to tell you, her son and daughter-in-law, Neville's parents, were driven to madness by Death Eaters. It was the Cruciatus Curse, Sirius explained, his expression dark and somber under Hermione's astonished gaze. End of this chapter. Chapter 763, The Lonely Hero. Oh, why are you here? 20 minutes later, Mrs. Longbottom finally managed to calm her daughter-in-law and coax her back to bed, rather than letting her squat barefoot in the bathroom of the ward. She intended to step outside to feed Neville's mother. Despite the commotion in the ward, Neville's father remained asleep, oblivious to the need for sustenance. As she turned around, she noticed Sirius, Tonks, and a little girl in a wheelchair at the door. "We came to see if we could help with anything, Augusta," Sirius said, standing at the threshold with Tonks and the girl, not stepping inside without an invitation. "It's just a small situation, nothing I can't handle," Mrs. Longbottom replied, rising from the hospital bed. Despite her words, the recent events had taken a toll on her aging body. Her back ached as she stood, and she longed to lie down. Her daughter-in-law, sensing her departure, sat up nervously, clutching Mrs. Longbottom's sleeve and casting fearful glances at the door. "Don't be nervous, Alice," Mrs. Longbottom reassured her gently. Turning to Sirius, she added, "Alice is probably a little afraid of you. If it's convenient, could you please help get some food for Frank and Alice? This time of day is the busiest in the courtyard." "No problem, Augusta," Sirius agreed readily. As he turned to leave, he paused and reminded Hermione, "Don't forget, Hermione, you can only stay out for half an hour." "Can we come in, Mrs. Longbottom?" Tonks asked. "Come in. Alice seems to like you quite a lot," Mrs. Longbottom invited. "Hello, Mrs. Longbottom," Hermione greeted, her voice slightly breathless. Neville's clumsiness was well known at Hogwarts. Over the past 2 years, the group led by Malfoy often teased him. Apart from Harry, Snape was the least favored among Gryffindor students, and Neville often bore the brunt of it. Even within Gryffindor House, many made harmless jokes about his clumsiness. Hermione's voice was tinged with emotion as she looked at the woman who had shrunk behind Mrs. Longbottom, too saddened to say more. Mrs. Longbottom introduced them. "Alice, these are Tonks and Hermione. They are here to visit you." The woman on the hospital bed appeared frail and haggard, her body shrunken beneath her pajamas, making her seem extremely weak. Her cheeks lacked color, and most of her hair had turned gray, aging her beyond her years. Yet, when she looked at Hermione and Tonks, there was a light in her eyes, not the wise or deep gaze of an adult, but the timid look of a child. Tears still marked Neville's mother's face, likely from the fright of not finding Mrs. Longbottom upon waking. Mrs. Longbottom didn't respond immediately, but glanced at her daughter-in-law, assessing her condition. She then turned and waved them over. Hermione noticed that after the old lady spoke, the light in Neville's mother's eyes brightened, and she made a vague sound of acknowledgement. Neville, despite his troubles, always tried to fit in and befriend everyone. Who would have thought that behind his cheerful facade, he was enduring such pain? "This girl," Mrs. Longbottom said, pointing to Hermione, "is Hermione Granger. She was Neville's best friend at school." There was another indistinct sound from Alice. Seeing the woman lying on the hospital bed, Hermione bit her lip, her dull brown eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, my friend," she whispered. "Hair as Alice." Atticus Blaine, who had been observing the scene quietly, stepped forward to assist Mrs. Longbottom. "It's all right, Frank," he said in a calm, soothing voice. "We're just visiting, and we'll be on our way soon." Frank Longbottom, Neville's father, seemed to relax slightly at Atticus's words, though his eyes still held a hint of confusion and distress. He settled back onto the bed, his movements slow and deliberate, as if each action required immense effort. Hermione watched the interaction with a heavy heart. The reality of Neville's family situation was more poignant than she had imagined. She had always known Neville as the shy, somewhat clumsy boy in her class, but seeing his parents in such a vulnerable state brought a new depth to her understanding of him. Mrs. Longbottom returned to her seat, her composure regained. "Thank you, Professor Blaine," she said, her voice a mixture of gratitude and weariness. "It's been a long day for them." Atticus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "If there's anything I can do, please let me know. I may not have all the answers, but I'm willing to try." Hermione felt a surge of admiration for Atticus. His willingness to help, despite the odds, was a testament to his character. She glanced at Neville's parents once more, her resolve strengthening. She would do whatever she could to support Neville, even if it was just delivering a simple piece of bubble gum. As they prepared to leave, Hermione turned to Mrs. Longbottom. "Thank you for allowing us to visit," she said sincerely. "It means a lot to us." Mrs. Longbottom gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you for being here. It means a lot to them, too." With that, Hermione, Atticus, and Tonks made their way out of the ward, the weight of the visit lingering in their hearts. As they walked down the corridor, Hermione couldn't help but think of the strength and resilience of Neville's family. It was a reminder of the sacrifices made in the fight against darkness and the enduring hope that one day things might change for the better. Atticus Blaine's hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with anger as he hurled the vase from the bedside table. "We need to get out of here and call for help," Tonks exclaimed, realizing that lingering would only complicate matters further. In a flurry of urgency, she pushed Hermione's wheelchair, hastily exiting the room. Left behind in the ward, Mrs. Longbottom was caught in a desperate struggle with her son, unsure of what to do. Neville's mother sat huddled on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed and helpless. End of this chapter. Chapter 764. Agent Atticus Blaine. We found Friedel, Neela, and Bagdar. In the days following our acquisition of the package from them, we obtained the list of all the wizards who smuggled out of the country. Here it is, Mr. Blaine. The weather was undeniably dreadful. Snow still clung stubbornly to the flower beds and rooftops, refusing to melt away. As dawn broke, the sky remained overcast, and a light drizzle began to fall once more. The damp, cold air created a shifting mist that hovered over the Thames River. A gentle breeze stirred the fog, sending it creeping toward the row of houses lining the riverbank. Atticus Blaine stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the misty landscape outside. With a sigh, he turned away and accepted the list from Kingsley, examining it closely. Several names on the list were familiar, but familiarity alone proved nothing. He scrutinized the destinations these stowaways had chosen after leaving the UK. After a moment of contemplation, he offered his advice. "We have limited resources, Kingsley, and can't afford to investigate each individual. I suggest we concentrate on those who have gone to France, Germany, and Albania." Kingsley quickly grasped the reasoning behind Atticus's suggestion. After a brief pause, he understood why Atticus had given such specific instructions. "You mean it aligns with the countries where the wizard skilled in curses you mentioned is located?" "Exactly," Atticus replied, rubbing his temples warily. "It's not the most rigorous approach, but time is against us, and we must pursue the most promising lead." With a resigned sigh, Atticus moved past the bed and headed toward the balcony. The roaring fire in the hearth filled the dark-toned hall with warmth, yet it couldn't dispel the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the villa. Stepping outside, he surveyed the rain-soaked courtyard, where dark green plants glistened. He then turned and ascended the spiral staircase to the second floor. It was a rational and prudent decision. Kingsley nodded in silent agreement and prepared to leave the guest room to organize the necessary tasks. However, before exiting, he hesitated, turned back, and spoke with uncertainty. The house they occupied was a 3-story villa nestled within a small garden by the Thames. High iron fences enclosed the garden on 3 sides, ensuring privacy and security. To the muggles who strolled nearby, it appeared to be the retreat of a wealthy individual seeking solitude. In reality, it was a well-guarded safe house established by the Aurors of the British Ministry of Magic in London. The Aurors who had prepared the place the previous night had left the portraits of their predecessors intact, merely using special enchantments to temporarily immobilize the figures within the paintings. "I need to speak with her," Kingsley said. "The Muggle girl, Mr. Blaine. I heard she's awake." Offering an apologetic smile, Atticus turned right and proceeded down the corridor to the farthest bedroom. A row of oil paintings depicting renowned, deceased Aurors lined the wall opposite the stairs. As Atticus glanced at them, he could sense the indignation etched into their rigid faces and eyes. Upon their arrival, the Aurors had swiftly rearranged the interior to ensure their secrets remained hidden from Muggle eyes. The girl, Louise, was inconsolable, her tears rendering her speechless. Despite Atticus and Kingsley's efforts to comfort her, her sobs persisted. Louise's grief was understandable, but her refusal to leave the house, even after Fry's departure, left Kingsley and the others at a loss. After a moment of silence, Atticus spoke softly. He drew back the woolen curtains, allowing a sliver of light to brighten the dim room. Then, he opened the wooden door with its glass inlay, leading to the balcony. Atticus Blaine stepped out of the bedroom and onto the balcony. "What that muggle accidentally mentioned last night is really bothering me," he thought. The door was ajar, and Atticus entered without knocking. The previous night, they had brought a muggle girl named Louise Ondare to the room where a young muggle man named Fraser had died. Although Louise had suspected something terrible might have happened to Fraser, seeing his lifeless body on the bed shattered her composure. The room was eerily quiet, devoid of any signs of life. The four-poster bed with its blue curtains was empty, and there was no steaming breakfast on the bedside table. In the silence, Atticus had to gently cast a spell to calm Louise, giving her a sedative to soothe her nerves before bringing her here. Louise sat huddled against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes were vacant, staring into the stormy world outside, with tears still clinging to her long eyelashes. She wore only a light sweater, and the open balcony's eaves couldn't shield her from the icy rain. The wet floor's dark traces reached her feet, soaking her trousers and causing her to shiver. Yet she seemed unaware. Atticus pursed his lips and subtly moved his fingers. Instantly, the wind and rain altered their course, and a hidden force dispelled the chill, making the air more bearable. "Would you like to talk?" Atticus asked gently, approaching Louise with a hint of compassion in his eyes. Louise's eyelashes fluttered as she looked at the gray-haired young man who had appeared beside her. His presence was enigmatic, and an instinctive fear made her curl up tighter. The grief of losing a loved one couldn't be eased by mere words, and Atticus, who had endured similar pain, understood this well. He said nothing more and retreated into the house. After a moment, he returned with Louise's coat. As Atticus Blaine draped it over her shoulders, Louise felt a surge of emotion, but she managed to suppress the urge to cry. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and dry. Atticus responded with a gentle smile. Louise recalled fond memories of her brother, slowly emerging from her silent world. Throughout this time, Atticus remained by her side, offering quiet companionship. She appreciated his presence, knowing he had questions, but choosing not to press her. "Who are you?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Atticus felt a sense of relief. If Louise had remained trapped in her sorrow, he might have resorted to unconventional methods, something he was reluctant to do to someone grieving, whether muggle or wizard. However, he knew he couldn't give her a straightforward answer. "You could think of us," he said, gazing at the river's ripples caused by the drizzle, "as an organization affiliated with the government. We investigate special cases that ordinary police can't handle." "Are you agents?" Louise asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "You could say that," Atticus replied with a smile. It was no wonder the man had told her during their last chance encounter that he wouldn't stay in this country for long. Louise often found herself pondering with curiosity. After all, being a secret agent was a mysterious profession to most people. However, the thoughts that quickly followed extinguished her curiosity. Her expression turned somber, and even her golden hair seemed to lose its luster. "It's convenient for me to ask," Louise said, lifting her damp hair with a sorrowful tone. "How did you find Fraser?" End of this chapter. Chapter 65. How did you find Fraser? Louise asked in a somber tone. A strong gust of wind disrupted the path of the icy rain as it pattered against the ground. The door and window between the bedroom and the balcony shook violently. The chill pierced through the warm barrier Atticus Blaine had created, causing him to shiver. Louise trembled as well. "Why don't we go inside and talk, Louise?" Atticus suggested gently, not immediately answering her question. He stepped forward, offering his arm to help Louise up from the ground. She accepted his assistance silently, without resistance. The fireplace in the bedroom had been lit at some point, filling the room with a warmth akin to a hot spring. Louise's features, previously tightened from the cold, began to relax and her mood seemed to improve slightly. Atticus guided her to the soft-backed sofa near the fireplace, then retrieved the breakfast prepared by the Aurors for her. He placed it on the coffee table in front of her, but Louise's expression remained cold, and she showed little interest in eating. "If you don't want hot pumpkin soup to warm your stomach, I can ask someone to bring you a cup of coffee," Atticus offered with a smile. "Oh, no, that's fine," Louise replied, her face finally softening. She picked up the porcelain bowl with her chilled fingers. After a few mouthfuls of the hot soup, her tense nerves began to relax, and hunger made its presence known. Despite her intention to confront Atticus, she found herself reaching for the pumpkin pie and grilled bacon on the plate. Atticus maintained a gentle smile, showing no sign of anxiety. "Yes," Louise began, frowning slightly. "Perhaps you've forgotten, Mr. Blaine, but I am a reporter for the London Daily News. Well, I'm still interning, but if such a serious bomb attack had occurred in London, the newspaper would have reported it." "Sorry," Atticus interjected. "You're welcome. I've already eaten," Louise replied, wiping her mouth with the napkin Atticus handed her. With his exceptional legilimency skills and the powerful mental acuity of a great magician, Atticus sensed that Louise's mood had calmed significantly. He leaned back on the soft sofa, ready to share the information he had prepared. "The situation is like this," he began. Louise, her cheeks flushed from the warmth and the meal, listened intently. "A bomb?" she exclaimed, her expression tightening with concern. "I've never heard of that, Mr. Blaine." After receiving a call the previous evening, Louise had abandoned her dinner and rushed to Cokeworth, going without food for over 10 hours. Now, having devoured her breakfast, she seemed to regain some of her professional composure. "This girl, both talented and academically gifted, is somewhat renowned in certain circles," Atticus continued. "She often receives gifts from admirers worldwide. So when she received a package from an unknown sender, she didn't suspect anything. She took it from the post office and opened it with friends at a coffee shop. The girl was seriously injured and remains in critical condition at the hospital. The explosion also affected several innocent bystanders in the shop. Customers," Atticus explained. Louise was stunned for several seconds before regaining her composure. Instead of asking who sent the bomb, as Atticus had anticipated, she looked at him with confused eyes. "It happened 2 days ago at a school in London," Atticus said calmly. "A girl named Hermione Granger received a package. Inside that package was a bomb." Louise's lips parted slightly as she absorbed the information, her complexion regaining some color. "I didn't hear anything," Atticus Blaine remarked, observing the tense posture of the puzzled Muggle girl before him. He raised an eyebrow, feeling a slight hitch in his breath. He had to admit, he had indeed forgotten that Louise was a reporter for a well-known newspaper. "Well, you know, Louise," he began, but quickly thought of an explanation. His voice was low, and his eyes gleamed with a deep intensity. "It's a bomb attack. This isn't just an ordinary injury case. It can be classified as a terrorist attack. If this gets out, it could cause widespread panic across the city. That's why we've been ordered to intervene in the investigation." "Oh," Louise interrupted, her dissatisfaction evident as she spoke fiercely. "With all due respect, Mr. Blaine, your reasoning is flawed. The government often makes foolish decisions, and this isn't new. The public has a right to know, Mr. Blaine. You have no right to infringe upon that." Louise's sudden outburst left Atticus momentarily perplexed. However, he quickly and deftly interrupted her tirade. "We'll discuss this issue later, Louise," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Right now, we're focusing on Fraser." "Fraser," Louise echoed, regaining her composure, though her eyes betrayed a mix of emotions. "Did Fraser send the bomb to that injured girl?" Atticus nodded slightly. "We've traced the package containing the bomb back to Fraser. He gave it to the owner of a pub near Charing Cross Street, instructing the bar owner to forward it to the girl. Based on the information provided by the bar owner, we followed the trail and investigated Cokeworth last night." Seeing the somber expression on Louise's face, Atticus softened his tone. "But by the time we arrived, Fraser was already dead. Do you understand what that implies, Louise?" Louise nodded. As an intern reporter, her logical thinking surpassed that of ordinary Muggles. "It means someone was behind Fraser. He was being used," she said, her voice breaking as she covered her face and sobbed. Her reaction was typical for someone grieving a loved one, yet Atticus noticed something peculiar. She seemed to accept too readily that Fraser had been coerced into delivering a bomb to an innocent girl, as if she had anticipated such an event. Moreover, her words during the phone call last night, "You are the ones who deceived him," had convinced Atticus to meet her in person. "Where is Fraser?" she asked a few minutes later. Her sobbing subsided, her eyes red and puffy. Atticus understood her question, and though he felt a pang of regret, he replied, "I'm sorry, Louise. This matter is of a special and serious nature. We need to handle it carefully. You understand, the relevant departments are searching for clues. We can't return him to you at the moment." It was a lie, of course. Whoever was responsible had covered their tracks meticulously, leaving nothing of Fraser behind, not even his body. "I knew he would make a big mistake sooner or later," Louise murmured after a moment of silence, her voice hoarse. Atticus's eyelids flickered slightly, but he maintained a calm demeanor. "Can you tell me, Louise, about Fraser and the group you mentioned that led him astray?" It was indeed harsh to ask her to recall these memories so soon after losing a loved one, but Atticus was reluctant to resort to more severe methods with Louise, so he gently guided her. The old Fraser wasn't like this. Louise's eyes burned with hatred. Some people deceived Fraser, telling him the world is magical. End of this chapter. Chapter 766, The Bewitched Fraser. At some point, the sky outside the house grew increasingly overcast, and the rain over the river adjacent to the villa intensified, creating delicate ripples on its surface. Despite the dreary weather, the chill in the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by a gentle warmth carried by the wind sweeping through the city. "Fraser is my brother. He's 2 years older than me," Louise murmured, curled up on the sofa with her arms wrapped around her legs. Her voice was tinged with sadness. "He was always kind, enthusiastic, and loved making friends. He excelled in his studies from a young age and was the pride of our parents. We were very close when he was at home. I'll never forget how, in high school, he had a crush on a girl from the next class. He even begged me to help him come up with ideas to win her over." Recalling these memories was painful for Louise, and her voice faltered as she occasionally paused to cry silently. Yet, through her fragmented narrative, Atticus Blaine began to piece together an image of Fraser's character. Hermione's attack was proving to be more complex than he and Dumbledore had anticipated. Initially, they thought Fraser, a Muggle, was merely an unfortunate target, but it was becoming clear that there was more at play. An organization, not just a couple of instigators, was involved. "My mother and I wanted Fraser to stay in the UK for university, but he insisted on going to Italy because the girl he liked was enamored with the artistic atmosphere there. They broke up after just 2 months because Lorlia fell for a wealthy, handsome boy," Louise recounted, her voice tinged with bitterness. She couldn't help but blame Lorlia for Fraser's decision to go to Italy. Atticus's eyes narrowed. "What school did he attend?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Atticus, a distinguished graduate of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, nodded thoughtfully. "That university has a storied history and is renowned as the alma mater of many European universities. It's a leader in theology and art, but Fraser initially wanted to be an engineer designing cars." "To study magic," Louise interjected, "isn't uncommon." "It's not really a big deal," she continued. "I later discovered that such groups are prevalent not only at that school but at many universities. They delve into magic, religion, and the divine. Many people are drawn to this kind of intriguing stuff." Atticus didn't respond with the skepticism Louise expected. Instead, he nodded slightly, his eyes deepening as if trying to peer through a foggy night. He rested his chin on his raised knees, his fingers interlaced. Kingsley, who had been standing outside the door for some time, pursed his lips tightly. "Then things took a strange turn," Louise said, her voice tinged with confusion and vulnerability. Tears clung to her eyelashes as she recalled events from years ago, her memory of them now blurred. She shrugged helplessly. "I don't fully understand how Muggles could gain magic. It was probably the focus of that society's research. Honestly, my parents and I didn't pay much attention at the time. We assumed Fraser had found a girlfriend at school and was too preoccupied to keep in touch with us. So, when he came home for Christmas in his second year looking haggard, his father even teased him. "Probably a muggle," Louise added with a wry smile, glancing at Atticus, whose expression remained calm. During his first Christmas break, he came back full of stories about his life at school, the interesting things he was learning, and the new friends he had made. To give up on him, I kept writing letters, hoping he would respond, but there was never any reply. It was as if Fraser had vanished into thin air. Atticus Blaine listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Did you ever find out what happened to him after that?" he asked gently. Louise shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "No, I never did. It's like he just disappeared. I tried everything I could think of to find him, but it was as if he had been swallowed by the earth." Atticus nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the weight of her words. "It must have been incredibly difficult for you and your family," he said softly. "It was," Louise admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were left with so many unanswered questions, and the pain of not knowing what happened to Fraser has haunted us ever since." Atticus leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with a determined gaze. "I promise to do everything I can to help you find the truth," he assured her. "We'll uncover what happened to Fraser, no matter how long it takes." Louise managed a small, grateful smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Atticus. It means a lot to me." With a renewed sense of purpose, Atticus Blaine set out to unravel the mystery surrounding Fraser's disappearance, determined to bring closure to Louise and her family. "I couldn't bear to see him continue down such a destructive path. So after I graduated, I returned to Italy," Louise said, her expression shifting to one of confusion and fear. "But by then, he was gone. No one knew where he had disappeared to, and the club he was part of had disbanded. I discovered that all the members had graduated and left the school. There had been an accident while I was still there. I'm worried about him, but I have no way to contact him." "Is that professor still at the school?" Atticus Blaine inquired, bringing up the professor once more. "I don't know. I didn't think to check," Louise replied, shaking her head. She then looked at Atticus with curiosity. "Why are you so interested in that professor, Mr. Blaine?" "Please, just call me Atticus," he said, pausing for a few moments before continuing slowly. "Groups like this often have a sponsor. If my hunch is correct, this esteemed professor might be the one who initiated the research." End of this chapter. Chapter 767, The Wise Leader. "The person who initiated the research," Louise murmured, biting her lip and shaking her head slightly. She struggled to grasp the full meaning of what Atticus Blaine had said. Atticus, however, offered no further explanation and simply asked, "What happened next? You must have seen Fraser, right?" It was a given. Otherwise, Louise wouldn't have obtained Fraser's phone number. "It was around Halloween the year before last," Louise began. "I received a letter from Fraser. It was the only letter I had ever received from him in all those years. The letter didn't appear in my mailbox, nor was it delivered by a postman. It just appeared suddenly on the balcony of the room I rented. There was no stamp, no sender's address, and no recipient's address. I recognized it as Fraser's through the handwriting and the contents of the letter." Louise's eyes were filled with confusion, as if she couldn't comprehend how the letter had come into her possession. In the letter, Fraser told me he had gone to a new country to continue their significant research. He mentioned it was arranged by the research organization he was affiliated with. Louise's beautiful face clouded with gloom. "Until then, I had always thought it was just a student interest group in Bologna. I never imagined the organization was so complex, with bases in other countries. He assured me he was fine and asked me to take care of myself and our parents." Atticus's eyelids twitched slightly. This was highly unusual. A muggle, who had been nearly driven mad in pursuit of magical power, suddenly showed concern for his family. There was clearly more to this. "Did you sense that Fraser might have been in a bad situation when he wrote this letter?" Atticus inquired. Louise gently dabbed her nose with a tissue, then crumpled it into a ball in her hand. "Yes," she replied, her voice tinged with anger. "Although he didn't explicitly say it, I could feel his fear. I couldn't reply because I had no idea how the letter had reached me. I even went to the police, suspecting Fraser might be in danger or kidnapped, but they said an unsigned letter didn't prove anything. Atticus asked directly, sensing Louise's distress as she realized it might have been the last time she heard from her brother. Her breath became uneven, and her eyes welled with tears. Atticus didn't rush her, instead offering a tissue from the coffee table. He felt a pang of regret. The letter had likely been delivered to Louise by an owl. If it still existed, it might have been possible to trace its origin. "That's right," Louise continued, her voice trembling. "He said those people were a group of evil lunatics who lured him into conducting magical research and experiments. They used babies and pregnant women as experimental subjects. I was terrified. I wanted him to go to the police with me, but it seemed to agitate him." "Where's that letter?" Atticus leaned forward slightly. Louise nodded, her voice filled with horror. "I met Fraser last September," she said hoarsely, looking at Atticus with tear-filled eyes. She found this mysterious Atticus Blaine to be a true gentleman. "I don't know how Fraser knew where I lived, but he showed up at my door." "I burned it," Louise admitted, her breathing rapid. "You must understand how shocked I was. I hadn't seen him in so many years. He looked a bit heavier than the last time, but his mental state was terrible, panicked. He said he had escaped." Louise noticed a flicker of surprise in Atticus's expression and quickly added, "It was." Fraser's request was clear. At the end of his letter, he implored me in a solemn tone to burn it after reading. The police suggested it might just be a prank. However, Fraser was adamant about not involving the authorities, fearing that if those magic-wielding terrorists found out, everyone would be in grave danger. He insisted he had witnessed magic firsthand, seeing people tortured and killed by it. I suspect he was either terrified or under the influence of hallucinogens, causing his confuse on. "You must have asked him where he's been all these years, and where he escaped from, Louise?" Atticus Blaine inquired seriously. From the details Louise provided, he felt closer to uncovering the truth, yet deeper mysteries loomed before him. He could surmise the type of organization Fraser was entangled with, and it wasn't surprising such a group existed. It was even possible there was an official shadow behind it. But why would an organization, which should remain hidden, provoke Hermione? They should know that targeting a young wizard at Hogwarts is akin to challenging both Dumbledore and themselves. "He doesn't want to say," Louise replied, nodding as she clenched her fists tightly. "He told me that knowing too much would endanger me." At that moment, he seemed more lucid. He regretted coming to me and asked me to look after my parents. Then he intended to leave. Naturally, I refused to let him go. I wanted to take him to the police and reunite him with his parents, but he resisted. We struggled for a long time. In the end, he only left me a phone number. He wouldn't tell me where he lives now. The tale of Fraser ended there, and then Atticus discovered him. Fraser had been turned into an inferi trap, his body left in the rental house. Outside, heavy rain lashed against the doors and windows, with faint thunder rumbling in the low-hanging clouds. In the dimly lit room, only Louise's soft sobs from the sofa and the crackling of the fireplace filled the air. Atticus closed his eyes, contemplating the information he had gathered. "Kingsley!" he suddenly exclaimed, startling Louise. The man across from her stood abruptly, his gentle demeanor replaced by a fierce intensity. His sharp eyebrows conveyed a thunderous resolve. Mr. Blaine, Kingsley, who had been listening outside, entered the room, striding over to stand at attention before Atticus, awaiting orders. This scene puzzled Louise. Despite Kingsley being older, he seemed to be Atticus's subordinate, showing him great respect. "Prepare yourself. We leave for Italy immediately. The remaining team will stay here and await further instructions," Atticus commanded quietly. Kingsley was unfazed by the directive, but hesitated momentarily. "According to protocol, Mr. Blaine, we need to apply for entry with the Italian authorities using a magic number and await approval before proceeding," Kingsley reminded him. Louise, sensing the unique aura emanating from Atticus, stood from the sofa, initially confused by the need for an application. However, she quickly realized that as government law enforcement officers, they likely needed official clearance to investigate a case in another country. "Given the urgency, Kingsley, under special circumstances, I believe that occasionally bending the rules isn't something to make a fuss about. What do you think?" Atticus Blaine asked, looking at Kingsley with a calm demeanor. I think you are a wise leader, Mr. Blaine, Kingsley replied unexpectedly, not insisting on his point, but instead offering a smile. Perhaps the Auror office would thrive under your leadership. Auror? Louise blinked in surprise. Wasn't she an agent? Or was this a code name for their elite operatives? I have no intention of competing with Scrimgeour for a position, Atticus said with a slight smile. I won't be making any further announcements to Dumbledore. You can take the time to write him a letter and explain the situation. Scrimgeour and Dumbledore were senior officials of a certain department, but why had she never heard of it? As a daily reporter, Louise felt a bit stung by her lack of knowledge. Then she noticed Kingsley turning his attention to her. So, Miss Ondare, how do you plan to arrange her, Mr. Blaine? Kingsley inquired. End of this chapter. Chapter 768, Iron Resolve. As Atticus Blaine and Kingsley fixed their eyes on her, the weight of their gaze made Louise Ondare shrink back in fear. For a moment, she was lost in a daze, but quickly realized their intentions. I'm not staying here, she declared defiantly. Despite the fact that the two men before her were agents of a secret government agency, Louise's voice rang with indignation. I'm going to Italy too. I need to find the bastards who killed Fraser and bring them to justice. He's my brother, and I have to do this. Kingsley frowned but remained silent, turning his attention to Atticus Blaine. You must understand, Louise, Atticus began calmly. We're dealing with a group of extremely dangerous criminals. As our investigation progresses, we will inevitably confront them. Without proper training, this is too dangerous for you. I suggest you stay here. Trust us, we will find those responsible for Fraser's death and make them pay. You have no right to do that, Louise shouted, her voice filled with defiance. She stepped back from Atticus and Kingsley, grabbing a spoon from the dinner plate and brandishing it at them. You can't order me to stay here, even if you are agents. This is illegal house arrest, and if you try it, I'll expose your actions in the newspaper. Atticus regarded Louise with a calm, emotionless gaze that unnerved her. Yet, she met his eyes with determination, refusing to back down. Disappointed in Atticus, whom she had once admired, Louise turned to the coat rack, picked up her coat, and draped it over her arm, ready to leave the room. Atticus nodded slowly. This doesn't make sense, Louise, he said, shaking his head. His deep eyes followed her movements, but Louise, though intimidated by his presence, stood her ground. The room fell into a tense silence, a stalemate between them. Louise didn't respond verbally, but quietly slipped her hand into her coat pocket, where she had stashed some self-defense gadgets before heading to Cokeworth the previous night. Before she could reveal her surprise, Kingsley's expression shifted. He locked eyes with Atticus and spoke solemnly. Atticus finally addressed her. Under Louise's wary gaze, he said slowly, "You're determined to investigate this matter, aren't you, Louise? Fine, you can come with us. Kingsley, please arrange the plane tickets. Our original travel plans need to change. I hope we can enjoy some authentic pasta for dinner." This Muggle girl had no idea what she was up against, a world unknown to her, filled with dark wizards who dared to turn Muggles into Inferi. Even with Mr. Blaine's presence, facing such dangerous foes required support from the Ministry. "I want to get out of here," Louise insisted. "Wait," Kingsley began, but Louise interrupted. "I don't need to be with you guys. I'm a reporter. I have my own ways of uncovering clues, but you can't keep me here. No way." "Pointless?" Louise's eyes blazed with resentment. "Is it pointless to investigate the murder of my brother?" "Mr. Blaine, you know," Kingsley started. "It doesn't matter, Kingsley," Atticus interjected softly, meeting Kingsley's sharp gaze. "Leaving Miss Ondare here would indeed be unfair and a cruel disregard for her feelings. She will eventually move past these painful memories." Kingsley was momentarily taken aback, unsure of how to respond. Atticus Blaine glanced at the bewildered Muggle girl, and a wave of sympathy washed over him. He finally nodded in understanding. The gloomy weather blurred the line between day and night. Amidst the heavy, swaying rain, the city's snow quickly melted away, erasing the last remnants of winter. With the arrival of spring, plants and trees were reborn in the flower beds lining the road, their green buds a testament to new beginnings. At 178 Frinker Street, Haas Orphanage, the inclement weather delayed the return of school-bound children. Yet the absence of most of the children did not render the orphanage cold or empty. Thanks to a surprising donation, the atmosphere inside was warm and lively. "Thank you, much, Mr. Lawrence. You are a kind and generous gentleman." Mrs. Reagan led the orphanage staff, who had donned brand new clothes for the occasion. Their faces were alight with gratitude and excitement as they surrounded a distinguished 60-year-old man in a black tuxedo, his gray hair impeccably groomed. The young men and women expressed their heartfelt thanks to him. "It's my honor to contribute, even in a small way, to charity, madam," Lawrence replied with a polite smile. As he surveyed the room, his gaze landed on a wall adorned with photographs beside the stairs. "Oh, those are photos of children who have left the orphanage. They often send us their latest pictures, and we display them here as a reminder," Mrs. Reagan explained enthusiastically to the kind old gentleman who had arrived unexpectedly through government channels. The crowd around Lawrence parted to allow him and Mrs. Reagan a closer look. "Miss Reagan, this is—" Lawrence's eyes purposefully scanned the photo wall. It didn't take long for him to spot a young man with gray hair standing in front of a magnificent pyramid, smiling brightly and waving at the camera. Lawrence leaned in, studying the young man's expression, which held a hint of hidden sadness. "Ah, that is a child who grew up in our orphanage. His name is Atticus Blaine," Mrs. Reagan said, unaware of the strange look on Mr. Lawrence's face. She proudly continued, "Even after leaving the orphanage, Atticus remains deeply connected to the children here. Despite his busy work schedule, he returns almost every Christmas. He is also one of the managers of the Haas orphanage. The new building where the children live was funded by him." "Is that so?" Lawrence removed his gold-rimmed reading glasses, wiping the corners of his eyes. He asked softly, "And what is Mr. Blaine doing now?" "He is the business manager of a company called Groning Drilling Rig Company. His main job is to negotiate new business for the company, which requires frequent travel. If you wish to meet him—" Mrs. Reagan hesitated, noticing Mr. Lawrence's unusual expression. She assumed he was displeased that Atticus had not attended the thank-you party. Lawrence, however, was certain that Atticus Blaine was not employed by Groning Drilling Rig Company and was, in fact, responsible for its sale. "Atticus left us an address, Mr. Lawrence," Mrs. Reagan added, sensing the elderly gentleman's silence and growing uneasy. "If you wish to speak with him, we can write to him and ask him to find time to visit and thank you. Although he is busy, I believe he would not refuse." "Oh, not at all, ma'am." Lawrence snapped back to reality, almost panicked. "I'm just a little curious. It's just a small donation, really. It's nothing at all. There's no need to trouble Mr. Blaine. You truly don't need to do this." End of this chapter. Chapter 769. Lawrence. With the gratitude of the orphanage staff still echoing in his ears, Lawrence masked his inner turmoil with a polite smile as he stepped out into the rain. What would the young master, Atticus Blaine, say when he found out? Lawrence's mind was a whirl of worry as he contemplated whether Atticus would demand the return of his donations. If Atticus truly despised his father, would he want the money back? Yet this was Lawrence's private donation, separate from the Blaine family's assets. If Atticus did confront him, Lawrence could explain it that way. "Mr. Lawrence, please get in," the driver, Sank, called out, struggling to hold a black umbrella against the howling wind. Despite his efforts, water splashed up from the ground, soaking Lawrence's trousers and allowing the cold rain to seep into his socks. Lawrence felt a chill of discomfort. The driver opened the door of a dark blue Rolls-Royce parked by the roadside and bowed slightly, inviting Lawrence to enter. To Sank's surprise, Lawrence did not step into the car. Instead, he turned around and stood quietly in the rain, gazing at the orphanage they had just left. "I want to go for a walk alone, Sank," Lawrence said, taking the umbrella from the driver's hand. Without further explanation, he turned and walked away, retracing his steps. "Mr. Lawrence?" Sank called out, bewildered. "You go back first, Sank." Lawrence's voice, though old and deep, cut through the rain. "I need some time alone. Are you worried I can't find my way back?" Sank's response was lost in the downpour, and Lawrence did not hear it. Perhaps it was the pressure of the rain on the wide umbrella that made Lawrence grip the cold handle tightly with his age-spotted hands. His back, once straight at the orphanage, now seemed slightly hunched. He walked slowly, pausing after a few steps to stare at the aging shops lining the bleak street. He didn't notice Sank's worried gaze from the car as it slowly drove away. In a daze, Lawrence imagined young Atticus Blaine, clad in shabby clothes, moving in and out of these shops. The thought brought a sting to his eyes. At the end of the road, a bicycle appeared, its back seat burdened with a heavy package. The rider, clad in a distinctive poncho, was likely a postman from the local post office. The weight of the packages, the slippery ground, and the fierce wind and rain made maneuvering the bicycle difficult. From a distance, the postman's frustrated curses reached Lawrence's ears. Lawrence took another step. His encounter with Atticus had been brief, only 2 hours, but it was enough to see that Atticus shared his father's proud and stubborn nature. Raised in an orphanage, Atticus's financial situation couldn't be prosperous, especially since he still supported the orphanage. Yet, he had refused a generous inheritance, despite his father's evident love for Atticus's mother. But Atticus couldn't accept deception. Lawrence sighed heavily, his cloudy eyes filled with confusion. He had dedicated his life to the Blaine family, caring for Atticus's father and grandfather, witnessing the family's rise to power and its rapid decline. No, it wasn't just a decline. Since the master fell ill, the Blaine family had collapsed. Now, in his 80s, Lawrence reflected on the family's legacy. The disappearance of the Blaine family seemed to suggest that Atticus Blaine's dedicated life had been in vain. Perhaps the master had found peace before succumbing to illness, but Lawrence couldn't bring himself to accept it. He couldn't bear the thought of the Blaine family vanishing. There was only one way to prevent this. The young master had to return to the family. It wasn't that the young master possessed exceptional business or political skills. In his investigation, Lawrence discovered only that the young master had been born in an orphanage. After leaving, there was no trace of his whereabouts or activities. Yet, as long as the young master was willing to come home, the Blaine family would endure. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the street, Kay using the glass windows of nearby shops to rattle as if an earthquake had struck. "Oh!" Lawrence exclaimed softly. The strong wind snatched the umbrella from his hand, and his hat was whisked away, tumbling through the air to the other side of the street. By chance, it flew into a narrow gap between two buildings. The umbrella rolled along the ground, traveling dozens of feet in an instant, before colliding with a postman struggling to maintain balance on his bicycle. With a loud crash, the unfortunate postman lost his balance and fell heavily to the ground. The heavy packages on the bicycle's back seat broke free from their bindings and scattered everywhere. One even struck the low guardrail separating the sidewalk from the roadway, causing a corner of the cardboard box to crumple. The umbrella was carried away by the wind, beyond retrieval. However, there was still a chance to save his hat, a gift from Master Blaine. After a brief hesitation, Lawrence dashed toward the postman. After all, it was his lost umbrella that had caused the fall. "Oh, thank you, sir," the postman grumbled, his foot caught in the bicycle frame as he struggled to free himself. An elderly gentleman, dressed impeccably, appeared beside him and earnestly helped to pull his trapped ankle free. "No need to thank me, sir," Lawrence said with an apologetic smile. "It was my umbrella that bumped into you just now." The postman frowned, clearly displeased, but he held his tongue. After all, the old man was no longer young, and managing such a large umbrella in the gusty wind was no easy task. Muttering under his breath, the postman focused on extricating his foot from the bicycle frame. Fortunately, it wasn't a complicated task. Lawrence did his best to lift the frame, pressing on the postman's ankle, and with a couple of strong pushes, the postman freed himself. After helping the postman to his feet, Lawrence quickly moved to the street to retrieve the large cardboard box that had fallen. The impact seemed to have disturbed its contents, which now rattled against the box's walls. "Oh, what could be in here?" Lawrence wondered aloud, noticing that the delivery address on the carton was for the Haas orphanage. "Who knows?" the postman replied, aware that all the packages in his cart were destined for the Haas orphanage. Seeing the old gentleman struggling with the box, he quickly took it from him. Perhaps some kind-hearted people donated pets to the children at the orphanage to keep them entertained. In my opinion, it's just adding trouble for Mrs. Reagan and the others. "All right, sir," the postman said, securing the somewhat unruly box. Atticus Blaine glanced at the damaged box in the back seat and turned to Lawrence, who was drenched from head to toe. "It's just an accident. Don't worry about it. I'll handle the rest of the packages myself. Maybe you should see if you can still retrieve your hat, if it hasn't fallen too deep." The postman shrugged, having witnessed the incident as well. "I hope so," Lawrence replied with a wry smile, deciding not to insist on helping the postman clean up. After all, for a man of his age, getting caught in the rain was far from pleasant. If he could retrieve his hat, it would at least offer some protection from the wind and rain until he could find a shop selling umbrellas. That would be quite fortunate. As Lawrence stepped over the low guardrail and approached the narrow gap between buildings where his hat was trapped, he peered under the dim streetlight and breathed a sigh of relief. The hat hadn't fallen too deep. He only needed to squeeze in and take a couple of steps to retrieve it. Fortunately, the buildings on either side had shielded it from the rain. With some effort, Lawrence squeezed into the alley, but the walls on both sides restricted his movement, preventing him from bending down. He had to use his foot to nudge the hat back into his hand. It was a challenging task for an older man, akin to performing acrobatics, and he was left breathless from the exertion. Finally, his hand closed around the hat. Bang! Bang! Lawrence exhaled in relief, taking a couple of deep breaths. Just as he was about to squeeze back out, two sharp sounds suddenly echoed from the other side of the street. End of this chapter. Chapter 770. Murder. The gloomy world was filled with the monotonous sound of falling rain, suddenly interrupted by two sharp bangs. Amidst the rain, which distorted the usual rhythm, two men in black coats and hats appeared abruptly before the postman. Yes, they appeared suddenly, in the truest sense of the word. The postman was stunned. His eyes widened in disbelief, his expression akin to someone who had just seen a ghost. Lawrence, nearby, frowned. He had only turned his attention after hearing the noise and missed the entire process of the men's sudden appearance. While he wasn't as shocked as the postman, he sensed that something unsettling was about to unfold. From his vantage point, Lawrence could see the two men with grim faces confronting the postman. However, due to the angle, it was difficult for the men to spot him. As they glanced around cautiously, Lawrence quickly withdrew his head, the chill in the air causing his blood to race through his aging body. You, the postman stammered, his mouth agape, cheeks puffed as if an egg were lodged inside. Ghosts, he muttered. Despite his fear, the postman understood that these men harbored ill intentions. Their eyes, filled with disdain, made it clear. Abandoning his bicycle, he turned to flee, driven by an instinct that screamed to distance himself from these men. How could they dare to kill someone in broad daylight? "Everything is petrified," one of the men murmured, a brown stick emerging from his sleeve. The rain muffled his voice, making it difficult for Lawrence to hear. Yet the scene before him was enough to send shivers down his spine. Lawrence had expected the men to draw a silenced pistol from their trench coats, imagining the postman, perhaps having crossed some powerful figure, would fall lifeless in a pool of blood. Having spent much of his life navigating the ruthless world of business under the tutelage of two former masters, Lawrence had witnessed such events at least 4 or 5 times. But the reality was far more bizarre than he anticipated. Squinting through his reading glasses, Lawrence saw one of the men brandish a small stick from his sleeve. The rain's descent was disrupted by a sudden gust, flapping the postman's poncho. In that instant, the fleeing postman froze, like a statue. He remained in a comical running pose, one foot on the ground, the other suspended in the air, arms flailing. Maintaining balance in such a stance was impossible. Under Lawrence's horrified gaze, the postman toppled sideways onto the wet ground, heavy but immobile. The fallen postman lay facing the narrow gap across the street, recalling the old man hiding there. He desperately tried to cry out for help, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't utter a sound. He couldn't even blink, forced to let the rain wash over his pale, despairing face. The two men moved in unison, stepping past the fallen postman without a glance, their focus on the package strapped to the bicycle's back seat. Lawrence, though not a man of great influence, believed he had seen much of the world through his experiences with his mentors. Yet, What transpired next shattered his understanding of reality. A man brandished his wand once more, causing several packages that had fallen to the ground to tremble slightly before slowly rising into the air. These parcels hovered in front of them, revealing their shipping and receiving addresses. From one of the boxes, which was dented at a corner, came a peculiar noise. Bang, bang, bang. With another wave of his wand, the man opened the box, releasing a flurry of colorful packages and bags. However, this spectacle was not what captivated Lawrence's attention. He was fixated on a few pairs of bewildered eyes. Suspended in mid-air, they struggled against an unseen force, and Lawrence finally realized what was causing the commotion. The creatures resembled frogs, but they were black, a rarity indeed. Were these two men, wielding such extraordinary powers, targeting the postman's packages with the intent to steal them? It's true that his packages were registered at the Hogsmeade post office, one of the men said. Breaking the wizarding statute of secrecy. You're going to be in trouble, the other replied. The implications are serious, and not even the staff at Hogwarts can resolve this. Lawrence managed to suppress his astonishment and stop pondering how those frogs were suspended in the air. His focus shifted to the two men, who were engaged in a hushed conversation. From his vantage point, it was impossible to discern their plans. After 2 minutes, the men reached an agreement and turned their attention to the postman, who was drenched from the rain. In Lawrence's mind, he had already condemned the unfortunate postman to a grim fate. Yet, when the two enigmatic figures looked at the postman, a chill ran down Lawrence's spine. All but one of the frogs floating in the air were released. These drenched frogs quickly fled the scene, hopping through an iron grate embedded in the roadside and vanishing into the drainage system. The remaining frog, however, drifted towards the postman, who lay motionless on the ground, facing away from the street. Under the influence of an inexplicable force, the black frog floated into the postman's open mouth and lodged itself in his throat. The postman's eyes widened in shock, and his previously immobile body began to convulse violently. A powerful and agonizing sense of suffocation gripped him, torturing his nerves. His eyes, filled with despair, rolled back, revealing the whites, which rapidly turned bloodshot. The two men in black trench coats stood still, observing the scene with indifference, patiently awaiting the demise of this muggle. The postman's struggle was brief, but for Lawrence, each second felt like an eternity. In the cold, rainy weather, his back and forehead were drenched with a thin layer of hot sweat. When the postman ceased all movement, Lawrence instinctively held his breath, exhaling only when a wave of dizziness washed over him. "Should we clean up?" one of the men asked. "This place already looks like an accident scene. There's no need to do anything," the leader replied. "Inform the Muggle police, and the Ministry will get the news next. I'm sure the higher-ups have already planned how to exploit this situation." After a brief exchange, the two men surveyed their surroundings once more. The leader noticed a narrow gap on the opposite side of the street, but it was merely a space between two buildings, not an alleyway that could accommodate people. After scanning it twice, he concluded that it was unlikely anyone would be foolish enough to hide there, so he averted his gaze. "Let's go," he said. End of this chapter. Chapter 771. Unfortunately, Atticus Blaine, Kingsley, and Louise did not have the opportunity to dine in Bologna, the capital of the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy. The presence of a Muggle among them significantly hampered the efficiency of Atticus and Kingsley's actions. Initially, Atticus had planned to rush to Italy using the illegal port key that Kingsley had acquired through a broker involved in smuggling. The energy required for apparition over such a long distance would be considerable. While Atticus could manage it alone, bringing Kingsley along would be challenging. Without prearranged coordinates, the only option was to use fireplaces connected through official channels, but the Flu network is constantly monitored by the Ministry of Magic. Being caught by the Italian Ministry of Magic for illegal entry would lead to even greater complications. Thus, they were forced to travel by Muggle plane. Despite the remarkable efficiency of the Aurors, Kingsley's team swiftly secured 3 tickets for them on the same day through some creative means. 3 Muggles mysteriously canceled their tickets. However, The inclement weather in London that day caused their flight to be delayed by nearly 4 hours. By the time they arrived at Guglielmo Marconi International Airport and checked into the Accademia Hotel, which they had booked over the phone, it was already 11 o'clock at night. In this city, rich with historical ambiance, few fast food restaurants remained open at such a late hour. Moreover, Louise, who had been grappling with the grief of losing her family, was exhausted from the non-stop journey. By the time they reached the hotel, she was so fatigued that she needed Atticus's assistance to walk. Late at night, Atticus's guest room was the only one in the hotel with a light on. The winter climate in Bologna is harsher than in London. Although the snow in the city had melted, the streets and alleys, steeped in history, were shrouded in a thick, icy fog, and a cold, damp wind howled through the city like the wail of a banshee. "This is the list I just received, Mr. Blaine," Kingsley said, handing a parchment to Atticus, who sat on a single sofa near the window. Atticus took the parchment and read it carefully. "The list we obtained from Friedel, Bagdar, and Neela includes all the wizards who have left the UK through smuggling since Fraser sent that package until today." Under the dim light, Atticus looked at the parchment with a sense of helplessness. When fully unfolded, the parchment stretched about 20 inches, densely filled with names of wizards and the countries they had traveled to. If there were no mistakes, the mastermind behind this incident, or at least the person who controlled Fraser to send the package and turned him into an inferi, was hidden among these names. Atticus scrutinized the list intently. With his sharp memory and mental acuity, he could memorize everything he read with care. "Mr. Blaine," Kingsley hesitated for a moment before speaking softly. Atticus did not respond verbally, but acknowledged with a slight hum. "Do you really think this list holds any significance?" Kingsley continued in a hoarse voice. "With all due respect, Mr. Blaine, I've dealt with wizards who dwell in the shadows for many years. I know them. These individuals treat caution as a survival creed. From my experience, most of these smugglers don't use their real names." Atticus smiled, lowering his head to continue studying the list on the parchment. "Do you think, Kingsley, by doing these things, I mean knowing that Dumbledore and I are at Hogwarts, and Hermione is currently the most popular Tri-Wizard Tournament champion in the European wizarding community? How can you dare to persecute her?" Atticus Blaine questioned, his voice steady yet filled with underlying tension. "They've been exploiting the time difference to send packages with old Tom, turning Fraser, who once served them, into an inferius, using his body as a trap. And as Louise informed us, they've been experimenting on babies and pregnant women, hatch hemp to uncover the secrets of magic. What kind of person would do such things?" "Bold, cautious, clever, evil, cruel," Kingsley replied, his brow furrowed, eyes flashing with intensity. After a moment of contemplation, he added, "And pride, that's the most crucial point." Atticus didn't lift his head, a faint smile playing on his lips, seemingly unbothered by the fact that these people didn't take him seriously. "I believe there are two possibilities for those who dare to commit such acts, Kingsley. One is that the mastermind behind these events is utterly fearless. They disregard the reputations of Dumbledore and myself, the British Ministry of Magic, and even the International Federation of Wizards." Kingsley nodded thoughtfully. "And the second?" "The second possibility is that they are supremely confident in their own intelligence. They believe our investigation will only lead us to Fraser, and are convinced we will never find them. Do you understand, Kingsley?" "You mean," Kingsley narrowed his eyes, a hint of anger in his voice, "because of their pride, they probably don't bother to hide their real names? It's not a lack of caution, but rather disdain?" Atticus nodded slightly, folding the parchment and placing it on the coffee table beside him. He leaned back into the sofa, gazing at the ornate electric lamp hanging from the ceiling. "I suspect they don't bother to conceal their identities, but the issue is there are too many names on the list, and we lack the time and manpower to investigate thoroughly. We can mobilize," Kingsley began, but his words were cut short by a sudden knock at the door. He glanced at it in surprise, then instinctively checked the teak clock with brass hands on the wall. It was 1:10 in the morning. His eyebrows rose, and though he remained silent, his hand moved to his wand. "Please come in," Atticus said, his gaze fixed on the door. After a brief pause, he spoke in a deep voice. With a click, the door swung open, and Louise entered, her face a mix of anxiety and unease. She appeared to have just risen from bed, wearing a light blue silk nightgown with intricate patterns at the chest and cuffs. The gown reached just above her knees, revealing her shapely calves. Her curly golden hair cascaded over her shoulders, and though she wore a coat, it did little to shield her from the late-night chill. Her slender legs pressed together, knees rubbing slightly, and under the warm light, the faint blue veins were visible on her fair skin. Kingsley frowned, confusion evident in his eyes as he stared at Louise. But as the silence stretched on, his expression softened, as if he had realized or misunderstood something. "Oh, I'm sorry," Louise stammered, her cheeks flushed. "I didn't mean to interrupt if you were discussing something important." She hadn't expected Kingsley to be in Atticus's room. Unable to sleep, she had noticed the light still on in Atticus's room while standing by her window. Realizing the potential for misunderstanding, she panicked and considered leaving. But, "Please, don't go, Miss Aundair," Kingsley interjected, his demeanor suddenly more accommodating. He quickly gathered the documents, his earlier sternness replaced by a newfound understanding. He left behind only the list he had brought. Before departing, he cast a playful glance at Atticus Blaine. As far as he knew, Atticus Blaine, who had accomplished many remarkable feats at a young age, remained single. "I have completed my report, Miss Aundair. If you have any questions about the case that require Mr. Blaine's expertise," Kingsley said, pausing as he passed by Louise, who was cowering in fear. For the first time in days, he smiled. "Please feel free to..." End of this chapter. Chapter 772. It's Not Fair. Click. Kingsley gently nudged Louise into the room, and before leaving, thoughtfully closed the door behind them. Silence enveloped the space, creating an awkward atmosphere. The soft light illuminated Louise's slightly flushed cheeks. She bit her lip gently, already beginning to regret her impulsive decision to seek company. "How can I help you, Louise?" Atticus Blaine's voice was gentle, seemingly unaware of the charm inherent in two single people sharing a room late at night. Perhaps it was his usual soft tone that helped Louise's racing heart gradually find its rhythm again. She took a few deep breaths, pursed her lips, and spoke in a slightly hoarse voice. "Sorry, Atticus. I couldn't sleep, and then I saw the light was still on in your room, and I wanted to find someone to chat with." It was understandable to have trouble sleeping. If Louise had been able to rest peacefully, Atticus would have been surprised. "Oh, if you don't mind, maybe we could have a drink," Atticus suggested, standing up from the sofa with a smile. "A little alcohol can help relax your nerves." The idea of sharing a drink in the middle of the night felt strange, but Louise noticed Atticus's calm demeanor, which reassured her. She nodded slowly, her heartbeat steadying once more. Atticus walked over to the wine rack, scanning the shelves before selecting a bottle of semi-dry sherry. With a practiced elegance, he rolled up his sleeves and opened the bottle with a corkscrew. Turning around, he saw Louise standing 10 feet away, her gaze fixed on the sofa where he had been sitting, hesitation in her eyes. Instinctively, Atticus almost reached for his wand to conjure a chair for Louise, but he caught himself just in time. From the moment he decided to bring Louise to Italy, he knew that this Muggle girl would eventually witness real magic. He wasn't afraid of this inevitability, but the wizard's statute of secrecy was deeply ingrained in him, causing him to delay the revelation. "Just sit there," he said, gesturing to the sofa as he poured the wine into a crystal-clear glass. Handing the glass to Louise, he settled himself on the edge of the bed. As the wine, with its subtle hazelnut aroma and faint tobacco notes, slid down her throat, Louise exhaled heavily, as if trying to expel all her sadness and troubles. She didn't speak immediately, instead sipping the wine silently, her eyes drifting to the brass clock on the wall, confusion clouding her gaze. Atticus understood Louise's turmoil. Her brother had lost his life to terrorists, and her parents were still unaware. Although her brother's relationship with the family had soured for a time, they likely believed Fraser was just temporarily misguided and would eventually return to a normal life. But now, all hope was lost. Fraser would never have the chance to change his mind. He had already changed it, choosing to protect them by staying away. Yet, he was still killed by those people. You say? Louise finally broke the silence, her voice distant as she stared at the ticking brass seconds. Does magic really exist in this world? Atticus paused, swirling the wine to disperse the sediment. He resumed his movements without offering an answer, leaving the question hanging in the air. Atticus Blaine understood that what Louise needed most at this moment was someone to listen, not someone to provide answers. Fraser has always excelled academically, Louise began, her voice tinged with confusion. He's incredibly smart. Few could ever deceive him. If magic doesn't exist in this world, then those who led him to his death must be the most skilled liars imaginable. Only the most intricate deception could have made Fraser so obsessed with studying magic. What if magic does exist in this world? Atticus mused softly, his gaze fixed on the play of light and shadow on the velvet carpet, as seen through his glass of wine. Louise looked at Atticus, surprised. She hadn't expected him to entertain her seemingly nonsensical thoughts. After all, Atticus was a government agent, and she, with her keen journalistic instincts, could tell he was a man adept at concealing his thoughts. If it truly exists, Louise said with a faint, weary smile, then this world is indeed unfair. Fairness is always relative, Atticus replied with a shrug. Magic isn't a divine gift. Humans have achieved incredible feats through technology. Magic can't take you to the moon, but technology has. Louise pursed her lips, casting a curious glance at Atticus. His careful responses to her dreamlike musings made her wonder if he truly believed in magic. Shaking her head slightly, she dismissed the thought. As a reporter, she knew that if magic were real, the media would have exposed it by now. Perhaps Atticus was simply a man who took things seriously, she mused. She took a sip of her wine and noticed a parchment on the coffee table beside her. "What is this?" she asked. "We considered the possibility that the terrorists responsible might have fled the UK, possibly through unconventional means," Atticus explained. "So I arranged for Kingsley and his team to compile a list of individuals who left the UK through smuggling shortly after the incident." "You all are impressively proactive," Louise remarked, surprised by their efficiency. Her hand instinctively reached for the list, but she recoiled as if burned. "Sorry, I can't think of anyone more qualified to examine this list than you, Louise," Atticus said with a smile, gesturing invitingly with his wineglass. Louise ran her fingertips over the parchment, surprised by its antique texture. Few people use such material these days. The list was extensive, filled with names and countries written in black ink. She scanned it aimlessly, not expecting to find any clues about the fugitives. As her eyes moved down the list, she paused at a name that seemed familiar, though she couldn't recall where she'd heard it before. Slightly tipsy, she quickly moved past it. "Did you find anything?" Atticus asked casually, as Louise folded the list and placed it back on the table. "Well," Louise shrugged, "the name Tom Riddle appears 3 times, but I doubt it's the same person from my school days." "Ah," Atticus chuckled, "that's quite unlikely." Their light-hearted exchange eased the tension in the room, and Louise felt a bit of the gloom lift from her heart. Before Atticus could refill her empty glass, she walked over with unsteady steps to pour herself more wine, seeking solace in its depths. Louise mused that drowning in one's sorrows is an effective way to deceive and numb oneself. She observed Atticus Blaine, who sat with an upright posture, exuding an air of confidence. With a curious tilt of her head, she asked, "Can you tell me about yourself, the young and promising Mr. Atticus Blaine?" The subtle flavor of the wine was misleading, and before she realized it, Louise felt her mind pleasantly dulled. She couldn't help but smile, the corners of her mouth lifting into a charming chuckle. End of this chapter. Chapter 773, This Must Be a Dream. As the golden, warm sunlight filtered through the narrow gap in the closed curtains, it gently caressed Louise's delicate forehead. The light gradually traveled down, brushing over her slender eyelashes. The stark contrast of light and shadow caused a slight discomfort, prompting her eyelids to flutter. Finally, Louise slowly opened her eyes. Her head was dizzy from lack of sleep, and she struggled to control her body's movements. After several failed attempts, she managed to prop herself up with her arms and sit up on the soft bed. The room was enveloped in silence. Apart from her own breathing, the only sound was the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Dust particles danced in the beam of golden light that pierced the room, adding a sense of tranquility to the atmosphere. Louise absent-mindedly twirled a few strands of her hair around her finger, gazing through the curtain's gap at the pale world outside. Suddenly, Louise threw off the quilt in a panic. She inspected her body, her heart racing. Her nightgown was intact, and her coat was still wrapped around her. She carefully examined herself and found nothing amiss. Her eyes darted to the sofa next to the bed, where her clothes from the previous night lay in a heap. Yes, this was indeed her room. Louise exhaled a heavy sigh of relief, though her slender, pale fingertips still trembled slightly. She pursed her lips, staring at her hands as her cheeks flushed from pale to crimson. What? A sharp scream shattered the room's quiet, echoing like a piercing cry. Louise quickly pulled the quilt over herself again, retreating into its confines as if the narrow, dark space could shield her from the overwhelming embarrassment. What had she done? Under the quilt, Louise bit into the silk fabric, her teeth grinding together. She didn't want to recall the events of the previous night, but the shameful memories forced their way into her mind. She remembered her inability to sleep due to helplessness and sadness. Discovering that Atticus Blaine was also awake, she had gone to his door. The first half of their conversation was normal, but then things took a turn. Louise couldn't blame anyone else. She was the one at fault. She had forgotten her poor tolerance for alcohol, and, under its influence, had begun teasing Atticus. The image of Atticus, naked and slightly helpless, lingered in her mind. He had offered to escort her back to her room, but she was in a carefree mood. What had she done? Louise's cheeks burned under the quilt. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping to block out the memories. She recalled suddenly pushing Atticus, causing him to fall onto the bed. Then, with his shocked eyes watching, she had thrown off her coat and leaped onto his bed. A beam of red light flashed, and she fainted. What? Louise screamed again. It must be an illusion, a dream. She panted, clawing at the sheets like an agitated kitten. I'm just sad and stressed. Yes, that's it. This is all a dream. It must be. About 20 minutes later, Louise, her hair disheveled, peeked out from under the quilt. Her eyes were vacant, as if she still couldn't comprehend her actions from the night before. But when she caught sight of the hour hand on the clock, reality began to sink in. The wall clock opposite her bed caught Louise's eye, and she suddenly jumped up. "Oh, damn!" she exclaimed. In a flurry, she leaped out of bed, shedding her coat and nightgown in mere moments, and dashed into the bathroom. Amidst the sound of rushing water, her frustrated cries could be faintly heard. "What have I done? Excuse me, where are Atticus Blaine and Kingsley Shacklebolt in rooms 301 and 502? Louise, her hair still damp, hurried down the stairs to the hotel lobby, her eyes darting around anxiously. The hotel manager, taken aback by her frantic demeanor, instinctively stepped back. It took him a moment to regain his composure. "Oh, you must be Miss Louise Onder?" he asked. Louise grabbed the manager's arms, nodding vigorously. The manager sighed in relief, his professional smallly returning. "Mr. Blaine and Mr. Shacklebolt instructed us to inform you that if you woke up, you should wait here. They will return before 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock? Louise exclaimed, her voice tinged with madness. There was still an hour and a half until noon, yet they had left her behind to investigate alone. Atticus had promised to let her be part of the investigation into the murderer's whereabouts, but now he had broken that promise. They could have woken her before leaving, she fumed silently. Leaving the manager behind, Louise instinctively headed for the hotel exit, but paused at the door. The silver glass set in the dark arch frame reflected her conflicted expression. She could try to find Atticus, but on such a vast campus the odds were slim, and if they returned to find her gone. For the next hour and a half, the hotel manager watched as Louise paced the hall, visibly agitated. She kicked the base of the undecorated Christmas tree and scratched at the brass floor sign on the wall. When the manager gently reminded her that she would have to pay for any damage, she glared at him with eyes that could burn holes. Every couple of minutes, she glanced at the old clock by the bar, willing time to move faster. When the clock finally chimed, Louise eagerly turned toward the hotel door. In an instant, a tall young man with gray hair and a dark green coat entered through the glass door. The pale light filtering through the glass made Louise shield her eyes. When she lowered her hand, Atticus Blaine was standing before her. "Are you awake, Louise?" Atticus asked, his voice calm and his smile reassuring. Instantly, Louise's anxiety and anger dissipated. The hotel manager was astonished to see the transformation. The woman who had seemed on the verge of an emotional breakdown was now composed, even smoothing her disheveled hair with a ladylike grace. "Yes, I just woke up a little while ago," Louise replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She avoided Atticus's gaze, focusing instead on his chest, her back rigid with tension. "Where's Kingsley?" "Oh, he's still visiting some students connected to the interest club that studied magic," Atticus explained. "It's challenging because the club disbanded a few years ago. Most of the students have graduated and returned to their home countries. Only a few are locals, and not many of them are still around." Louise's eyes widened in surprise. It was quite a feat to learn so much in just one morning. "What about the professor?" she inquired. Atticus Blaine was about to respond when a hotel guest politely asked him to step aside. "Let's go, Louise. I bet you haven't had breakfast yet. I need to refuel too, so we can chat over a meal," he suggested. "Aren't you waiting for Kingsley to join you?" Louise asked. "Kingsley won't find a place to eat without me. I came here specifically to wake you up," Atticus replied nonchalantly. He turned and walked out the door, waving over his shoulder. Louise felt her heart skip a beat. She hummed softly to herself and quickly trotted after Atticus. End of this chapter. Chapter 7 and 74. The Enigma of Wittelsbach, Bologna, a city steeped in the rich tapestry of Muggle literature and art, stands as a testament to the Renaissance era with its palaces, city walls, towers, and Gothic churches. The swift march of technology has breathed new life into this ancient city, enhancing its industrial prowess and social welfare, allowing its residents to savor the joys of life. For a casual lunch, Atticus Blaine didn't fuss over his choice of eatery. He simply selected a quaint restaurant nestled along a retro street brimming with cultural heritage. After a brief exchange, Atticus signaled to the waiter, "One serving of tagliatelle, one of fusilli, and a bratwurst, please. Oh, and if you have chopsticks, I'd appreciate a pair. Thank you." The attentive waiter, sporting a brown beard, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Bologna, a renowned tourist destination, often hosted visitors from the East, but it was unusual for a Brit with a distinct English accent to request chopsticks. "Please wait, sir," the waiter replied, jotting down the peculiar request before hurrying off. "Chopsticks?" Louise echoed, her pronunciation slightly off. As a trainee reporter for a London daily, she was well informed, yet she was intrigued by Atticus's request. "They're quite effective dining tools. I've grown accustomed to using them for noodles," Atticus explained calmly. "I discovered them during a business trip to the East." Louise pursed her lips and nodded. Normally, she might have engaged Atticus in a debate about the merits of chopsticks, but today, there were more pressing matters at hand. "That professor," Louise began, but Atticus preempted her. "Field Wittelsbach, as he was known, has predictably left the University of Bologna. Shortly after his departure, the society Fraser belonged to disbanded. It's likely Fraser left with him, though they might have parted ways to avoid detection." "Wittelsbach?" Louise paused, recalling her elective course on surnames in college. "Isn't that an ancient noble surname?" Atticus nodded. "Indeed, but the authenticity of the name is questionable." He reached into his pocket, retrieving a photograph and placing it on the table. The image depicted a man with short, curly brown hair and a meticulously groomed gray beard, more refined than the waiter's. His broad face was framed by square glasses with black rims and gold wire. The wisdom in his eyes and his elegant demeanor suggested a scholar of great repute. Louise examined the photo closely, frowning not because she recognized the man, but because of the photo's nature. It wasn't a typical photograph, but appeared to be a masterful sketch, hand-drawn and enhanced with color and special techniques. She shared her observation with Atticus, who nodded in agreement. During Fielder Wittelsbach's tenure at the University of Bologna, he left no photographic evidence of his presence. The image you see was crafted from descriptions provided by his former colleagues and students when the Massachusetts police sought him. Like the name he used, I question its authenticity. Louise's eyes widened in shock. She didn't fully grasp everything Atticus Blaine had said, but she immediately understood the crux of the matter. "Wanted," she exclaimed. Atticus smiled, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Oh, the police aren't as inept as you might think, Louise. After Wittelsbach left Bologna, the Magical Research Society he founded quickly disbanded, except for Fraser. As you mentioned, several members of the society met with unfortunate fates. The police investigating the incidents aren't naive enough to dismiss them as mere accidents. Field Wittelsbach is their prime suspect." "Did they find him?" Louise blurted out. Realizing her question was naive, she bit her lip. Atticus shook his head, confirming her suspicion. The police made considerable efforts to trace Wittelsbach's whereabouts after he left Bologna, but all attempts were futile. The identity he used left no record of purchasing plane, train, or bus tickets. It seemed as if he vanished on foot from the country. Of course, this was impossible. Wittelsbach was a wizard, and Muggles would never be able to track his departure from Italy. Even if the Italian Ministry of Magic had records, the chances of finding him were slim. Therefore, Atticus and Kingsley refrained from investigating further. After all, they had entered the country illegally. If the Italian Ministry of Magic discovered that Atticus Blaine had sneaked in without notice and with unknown intentions, it would be unsurprising if they dispatched all available wizards to politely escort him out. "I don't understand," Louise said, biting her lip in confusion. If Wittelsbach didn't want to expose the secrets of his sinister society, wouldn't he have let most people go? Their conversation paused as the waiter arrived with their food, presenting the dishes and the chopsticks Atticus had requested. As they began to eat, Louise stole glances at the man across from her. Atticus, adept with chopsticks, displayed impeccable dining etiquette, reminiscent of a nobleman trained in such manners from a young age. Even the young women at nearby tables couldn't help but glance back, whispering about the distinguished British gentleman. Unconsciously, Louise's thoughts drifted back to the previous night's foolish decisions. Her cheeks warmed slightly, grateful that Atticus hadn't mentioned anything about it. Yet, a flicker of anger and sadness lingered in her eyes. Was her charm really that lacking? She pondered indignantly while cutting her sausage. "This club isn't as simple as you think, Louise," Atticus said 10 minutes later, setting down his chopsticks and wiping the corners of his mouth with a napkin. He took a sip of lemonade from a blue glass, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances from other diners and the turmoil in Louise's eyes. "Student groups that appear to be organized around mere interests and hobbies often have a strict internal structure," he continued, resting his elbows on the table and intertwining his fingers thoughtfully. "According to Kingsley and my investigation this morning, Field Wittelsbach is undoubtedly at the top of this student organization, surrounded by genuine wizards. His trusted followers aren't students, and below them are students like Fraser, who, in Wittelsbach's eyes, possess research talents. These 3 tiers form the core of the organization, while those on the periphery, they are merely hobbyists, which is why they survived." Louise pursed her lips, allowing the chaotic thoughts in her mind to settle. Ironically, it was Atticus Blaine's talent for research that landed Fraser in jail, only for him to eventually escape. Mr. Blaine. Louise was engulfed in her sorrow, while Atticus was busy formulating the next steps based on the information they had. Meanwhile, across the street from the restaurant, in an unnoticed alley, Kingsley, with a serious expression, approached with purpose. "There are some new discoveries that may interest you." End of this chapter. Chapter 7-5, The Monastery. Thanks to the prosperity of the textile industry, Bologna was once a city interwoven with rivers, earning it the nickname Little Venice. However, after the World War that left its mark on both the wizarding and Muggle worlds, most of these rivers were relegated to the underground, leaving only a few visible reminders of the city's past splendor. In the University District, sunlight danced on the surface of a sparkling, meandering river, flanked by a patchwork of low-rise buildings. Along the riverbanks, sparse forests provided a serene backdrop where young men and women, their arms laden with heavy books, strolled through the dappled light and shadow. These Muggle teenagers gathered in groups, their light-hearted laughter occasionally startling the birds from their perches. "Where did you go to college, Atticus?" Louise asked, her melancholy slightly lifted by the relaxed atmosphere of the forest. She reminisced about her own student days as she observed Atticus Blaine, who was curiously watching the students. Well, Atticus blinked, momentarily caught off guard. University, Louise repeated, emphasizing the word. She tilted her head, studying his profile. His fair and delicate complexion suggested youth, yet his calm demeanor and eyes, as deep as the abyss, gave him an air of timeless wisdom. I assume you graduated no more than 3 years ago, right? Ah, Atticus smiled. Probably. Realizing his answer was vague, he pursed his lips and glanced at the energetic faces around them. With a hint of nostalgia, he added, I'm so busy with work that I barely have time or energy to recall the good times of my student days. Kingsley, their leader, seemed to sense something and quickened his pace. Louise noticed this, and her curiosity piqued, her eyes darting between the two men walking ahead of her. Speaking of which, Louise raised an eyebrow. Atticus and Kingsley, you both work in the same government department, right? But you seem so different in age. That's quite unusual, especially in a government setting. Atticus, how did you become Kingsley's superior? Let me guess, Blaine, I did hear about a certain high-ranking official at Downing Street. Louise studied Atticus's expression, hoping to glean some insight. There's no chance, Louise, Atticus replied with a serene smile, offering no clues. Is it because of my excellent workability? Excellent workability? In a government department? Louise snorted, recalling some unpleasant memory. She was intrigued by the mystery of how Atticus could pose as Kingsley's superior and hoped to uncover their true identities. However, her attempts to probe them were met with skillful deflection, and instead, she found herself divulging more about her own life. By the time Louise realized she had shared too much, they had arrived in a desolate area, devoid of people. The river that had accompanied them dwindled to a trickle before disappearing into an underground channel beneath an arch bridge of gray bricks. Beyond the bridge, the riverbed was choked with silt and decaying leaves. On the opposite bank stood a monastery constructed of red bricks, its window frames broken and detached from the main structure. The walls of the monastery loomed silently, a testament to the passage of time. The monastery before them was draped in withered vines, and its corners, embedded in the damp mud, bore the unmistakable signs of mold and decay. At the building's highest point stood a white stone bell tower, crowned with a gilded cross and a hollow dome. Clearly, this ancient monastery no longer served its original purpose and had likely become a refuge for vermin. This is the current residence of Onisto Pastore, Mr. Blaine, Kingsley announced, halting in front of the arched bridge. He turned to look at Atticus Blaine, who was gazing intently at the monastery. And his daughter, Valeria Pastore, was the only student who vanished before the disbandment of the society that studied magic. Before her disappearance, Onisto Pastore ran a local business, a somewhat renowned leather boot workshop. He was also known to sponsor a local interest club. Kingsley paused briefly before continuing. After his daughter disappeared, Pastore lost interest in managing his factory. He quickly sold all his businesses, his house, his car, and eventually donated a large sum to charity before choosing to live on the streets. For reasons unknown, Atticus was unmoved by this tale. A cold glint flickered in his dreamy lavender eyes as they caught the sunlight. I didn't expect it at all, Louise said, blowing her nose with a mix of sadness and anger. The first time I came here, Valeria took me to the basement where Fraser was staying. She was a beautiful and cheerful girl, a member of the Magic Research Club. She was always willing to talk about the club, and because of her, I changed my view of the club Fraser had joined. Atticus offered no comment on the matter. His penetrating gaze remained fixed on the forgotten monastery, scanning its interior through the weathered walls. Let's go in and say hello, he said calmly, stepping past Kingsley and leading the way toward the monastery. Inside the courtyard, the weeds were even more rampant than those outside, causing the original stone bricks to crumble. The clogged sewer had turned half the courtyard into a stagnant, putrid sludge pond. Despite the bright sunshine, Louise shivered as she stepped inside, a strange gloom casting a shadow over her vision. Mr. Blaine, she murmured, as the colorful stickers on the broken glass windows of the dilapidated church caught the sunlight. casting vibrant reflections on the intruders. These remnants silently spoke of the place's former glory. Even Kingsley, feeling the chill in the air, frowned and softly called out. Surprisingly, Atticus was in no rush to explore the monastery. He stood behind the decaying door, closed his eyes, and listened intently to the whispers carried by the dark wind. After a moment, he opened his eyes, a slight smile on his lips, though his eyes remained devoid of warmth. "I imagine it's quite frightening here at night." Louise, puzzled by Atticus's remark, frowned and glanced around. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would he live here, unless he's mad?" "Perhaps he is truly mad, this Mr. Pastore," Atticus replied, shaking his head slightly. Instead of entering the main hall to pay homage to the cross or searching room by room, he walked briskly along the corridor to the monastery's backyard. There, amidst a patch of grass, stood a snow-white building. It was once. The building stood in a state of disrepair, its purpose long forgotten. The round spire, with its thick brick walls, featured a small square window positioned 7 or 8 feet above the ground, reminiscent of a solitary cell or a prison. "Is he in there?" Kingsley's deep voice carried a note of caution as he noticed a series of crooked footprints leading from the end of the corridor to the doorway of the sunlit yet shadowy building. An inexplicable urge to draw his wand surged within him, but a glance at Louise, who was visibly recoiling from the cold air emanating from the structure, made him resist. "Let's go and visit Paz. I'm not entirely sure if it's him, but he should be the owner here," Atticus Blaine said calmly. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from within the building, just as Atticus took a step forward, causing him to pause. Louise's face turned pale with fear. In that brief moment, she instinctively sought comfort from the person she felt could offer the most security. She moved closer to Atticus, clutching his sleeve tightly. The knocking grew more frantic and intense, as if the person inside was desperate to convey something. "Let's go," Atticus said, his lavender eyes glinting with a mysterious light, the whirlpool within them turning slowly like a millstone. His words puzzled both Louise and Kingsley. "Let's go help him." End of this chapter. Chapter 776, Magic Exists, Part 1. A sudden gust of dark wind swept through the desolate courtyard, bending the waist-high weeds in its path. The chill in the air diluted the warmth of the pale sunlight. Louise, entranced by the swaying grass, shivered and instinctively hugged her arms. The persistent banging sound of dong-dong echoed from the white building, carrying a hint of hysteria. Atticus Blaine emerged from the corridor, striding towards the round building with its pointed tower. His flowing robe rustled against the dense grass, creating a soft, whispering sound. For some inexplicable reason, as Louise watched Atticus's figure grow taller in the distance, a smile crept onto her face. She felt a sudden illusion, as if a thick barrier separated this man from the surrounding environment, as though he belonged to another world. Kingsley glanced at Louise, his right arm held awkwardly straight, and quickly followed Atticus. "Hey, wait a minute. Louise snapped back to reality, letting out a guilty cry as she ran to catch up, grabbing Atticus's sleeve. The solitary building in the center of the vast courtyard indeed resembled a confinement room. Its narrow interior and windows set away from the sun heightened the sense of claustrophobia. As Atticus's vision adjusted from the bright outdoors to the dim interior, even he experienced a moment of blurred sight. Boom, boom, boom. When Louise finally saw the source of the strange noise and the person responsible, her face displayed a mix of surprise and confusion. The cylindrical room offered a clear view. Most of the floor was covered with withered weeds gathered from the courtyard. Scattered among the grass were various objects. A coat soaked in muddy water and dried in the sun, a flattened square iron box used as a food container, and a hammer with its head and handle separated. Half kneeling on the grass was an unkempt man. Judging by his tangled gray hair, he appeared to be an older man, resembling the lifeless individuals Louise had seen outside the Cokeworth industrial area. He looked like a beggar, with filth clinging to every inch of exposed skin. Louise finally understood the source of the thumping sound. The beggar in the solitary room was holding a shotgun, frantically striking the wooden butt against the concrete floor. His movements were mechanical, yet powerful. At first glance, it was clear the old man was deranged, his face dull and lifeless. Yet his bloodshot eyes, embedded in his dirty face, were fixed on the ground, repeatedly lifting and smashing the heavy gun butt. "What are you doing?" Louise asked blankly, stunned. Her voice was soft, not expecting an explanation from the seemingly insane beggar, but rather muttering to herself in astonishment. The beggar, with an uncanny sharpness, caught Louise's unclear voice amidst the rustling grass. He suddenly raised his head, staring at the three uninvited guests who had intruded upon his domain. In just 2 breaths, the light in his eyes shifted from fear to confusion to ferocity. In Louise's blank gaze, still unable to comprehend the situation, the beggar's expression turned ferocious. He raised his gun decisively, pointing the ominous black muzzle at Atticus Blaine. "Be careful!" Louise barely had time to scream, her voice shrill with fear. She couldn't even push Atticus Blaine aside, her arms hanging limply at her sides. Boom! Under the bright blue sky, a gunshot echoed across the wilderness, startling countless birds that had been pecking at seeds. The wind, once gentle in the courtyard, suddenly turned fierce, stirring up dust and smoke that blurred the pale sunlight. Less than 10 feet in front of Atticus, a barrier appeared, as if by magic. This transparent shield resembled ripples on water, or air that had thickened to an almost tangible viscosity. A hot, round iron bullet, still faintly glowing red, hovered at the center of the barrier. It floated like a leaf on water, unable to move forward. Louise, her hair tousled by the wind, stared at the bullet, trapped in the transparent ripples. She pushed against Atticus's arms and collapsed to the ground, her face drained of color. Silent casting and wandless magic, Kingsley watched Atticus Blaine with admiration, his hands empty and his expression unreadable. He couldn't determine if Atticus's magical barrier was the iron armor curse or a more advanced protective spell. Regardless, the silent and wandless casting demonstrated a mastery far beyond Kingsley's own abilities. Kingsley glanced at Louise, whose mouth hung open in shock. After a moment's hesitation, his wand slipped into his palm. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted, and with a snap, the shotgun flew from the ranger's hands into Kingsley's grasp. The bewildered expression on the homeless man's face was no better than Louise's. He stood frozen, gun raised, his face a mask of confusion. But as time passed, his astonishment faded, replaced by a growing panic that clouded his eyes, as if recalling some horrific memory. His fear was so intense that his frail body began to tremble. Suddenly, the wanderer let out a strange, jackdaw-like cry, and shrank against the wall, hiding his head in his arms and shivering. His constant whimpering was pitiful to hear. "This man," Kingsley said hesitantly. "I think you're right, Kingsley." Atticus nodded slightly, his eyes deep and contemplative as he assessed the homeless man's condition. He suffered some kind of torture, likely the Cruciatus curse. Atticus and Kingsley moved away from Louise, approaching the wanderer. Atticus leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Pastore?" he called gently. The ranger didn't respond, clutching his head and avoiding their gaze. With a heavy sigh, Atticus raised his wand, which had slipped from his palm, and pointed it soothingly at the top of the wanderer's head. A soft, milky white light tinged with blue enveloped Onisto Pastore, and his trembling ceased. His body lay flat, floating gently in the air, though his eyes remained open and lifeless. Atticus paid no mind to how this display shattered Louise's understanding of the world. He looked deeply into Pastore's eyes, and in the next moment, his own eyes glowed with a brilliant purple light. End of this chapter. Chapter 7 and 7. Magic exists. Pain, never-ending pain, shattered all clarity and reason. Atticus Blaine's vision suddenly darkened, and when the light returned, he found himself standing in a world of endless chaos. Above him, the dark red sky flashed with black lightning, casting an ominous glow. Below, a tumultuous sea raged, and the howling wind carried the echoes of cries and wails. Atticus's expression was cold and stern as he stood in the void, gazing down at the turbulent ocean below. This chaotic sea represented Pastore's consciousness, with every drop of water symbolizing a thought that had crossed his mind since entering this world. Yet, under the relentless assault of black thunder and the violent collision of waves, these thoughts were shattered. Atticus observed the violent sea for a long time before slowly raising his head to confront the source of the chaos in this ocean of consciousness. With a single step, he appeared at the edge of the sea, which floated in the boundless void. Beyond its boundary lay absolute darkness, where a massive vortex, reminiscent of Charybdis from mythology, churned and threatened to swallow the entire sea of consciousness. Each second, the vortex endured thousands of thunderous strikes, emitting a wail of pain. Atticus frowned slightly, his gaze shifting to the dark red sky and the black thunder that emerged from the void. After a moment of contemplation, he raised his right hand, spreading his fingers toward the sky in a gesture of support. Golden flames erupted from his palm, gradually transforming into the shape of an umbrella. The golden canopy expanded cautiously in all directions, yet the world of consciousness trembled slightly as the flames spread, causing everything within sight to quiver. Atticus's frown deepened as he carefully controlled the flames, ensuring his power did not destroy the fragile spiritual world of a muggle. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, a vast curtain of fire appeared above Atticus's head, completely shielding the violent whirlpool beneath him. However, his expression remained tense. The thunders from the sky pierced through his protection, not due to a breakdown, but because they were beyond interference. These black thunders were not formed by magic, but were spiritual attacks born from the malevolent thoughts within the Cruciatus Curse, a power from another dimension. Realizing the futility of his efforts, Atticus waved his hand to disperse the flames. He looked up at the black thunder emerging from the void, squinting as if deep in thought. In the material world, dozens of minutes would have passed, and Atticus, who had remained silent, finally took action again. He brought the index and middle fingers of his right hand together, placing them between his eyebrows. A transparent, water-like substance began to flow slowly from the point of contact, a challenging task for Atticus, as he pulled this power from his spiritual body, a power he had never used before. The clear spring flowed sluggishly, instinctively trying to return to Atticus's spiritual body. Yet, with his determination, the transparent material formed a canopy that covered less than half of the vortex. Despite his exhaustion, this was not due to a lack of strength, but because wielding the power of the soul was beyond Atticus's current capabilities. Nonetheless, the defensive effect of this power, the defense of the soul against the onslaught of malevolent thoughts, was immediate. Those vicious black thunders struck the transparent canopy like rain, yet they failed to penetrate it, not even causing a ripple. Beneath, the whirlpool found a moment to breathe. The churning speed of the vortex slowed, transforming the once chaotic roar of water into a more rhythmic, albeit still harsh, wailing. Atticus Blaine, having ceased his efforts to force the power of his soul from his spiritual body, squinted and listened intently. "Stop it, you bastard! Get out of Valeria! Please don't do that! Stop!" The repeated pleas, mingled with cruel laughter and a girl's cries, "Pie!" reset Atticus's heart, a cold light flashing from his narrowed eyes. "Mr. Blaine." Although much time seemed to pass in the spiritual realm, only a few seconds elapsed in the outside world. Kingsley observed Atticus, who had been bent over, take a step back and straighten up. Sensing what Atticus had been doing, Kingsley immediately inquired, "What did you find?" "Very limited, Kingsley," Atticus replied, the light in his eyes fading as he shook his head solemnly. "As I mentioned before, Mr. Pastore was tortured by the Cruciatus Curse. The mental resilience of muggles is quite fragile, and his consciousness was completely shattered." Kingsley's gaze fell on Pastore's expressionless face, a mix of sympathy and a deepening gloom in his eyes. "This sounds like what happened to the Longbottoms. St. Mungo's couldn't restore them even after more than 10 years. "But it's not without gain," Atticus interjected, recalling the torture Neville's parents endured. His eyelids fluttered slightly as an idea formed, though now was not the time to dwell on it. He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. Laughter suddenly echoed in the small room, young yet filled with cruelty. It was the voice of the torturer Atticus had heard in Pastore's Sea of Consciousness, a remnant left by the wizard. Even with his consciousness shattered, Pastore's fear and hatred of this voice were deeply rooted, almost engraved into his soul. Seeing Kingsley's slightly puzzled expression, Atticus explained, "I suspect the owner of this voice isn't Field Whittlesbach, but there's no doubt he's at the core of the group studying magic that Fraser is part of. If we're fortunate, he might be the one sent to Hermione." "Angus Aeschylus," Atticus continued, planning to ask Kingsley to have his aurors take this recording. to those involved in the smuggling business for comparison with their memories. If they were lucky, this might be the man who secretly entered England and sent a package to Hermione. Even if not, Atticus intended to have Kingsley send the unfortunate Mr. Pastore to St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. If no new clues emerged, then, while waiting for the investigation into those cursed masters to conclude, he could attempt to collaborate with Dumbledore to unearth more clues from Pastore's memory. And then, Angus Aeschylus. Louise's worldview had been shattered ever since she witnessed Atticus Blaine deflect a bullet. She stood blankly at the door, watching Atticus wave a small wand, making the world seem to transform by magic. The wanderer fell silent, floating in midair. She listened to the conversation between Atticus and Kingsley. Muggles, Cruciatus Curse, shattered consciousness, cruel laughter echoing in her ears. The overwhelming absurdity nearly caused Louise to faint. She clung to the door, struggling to remain upright, staring intently at the two magicians who seemed to have overlooked her presence. Thoughts swirled in Louise's mind, and she began to recall certain things. Angus Aeschylus, Atticus and Kingsley. Atticus Blaine and Kingsley exchanged glances before turning their attention to Louise. The girl stood pale and trembling at the doorway, and Atticus felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could vividly imagine the torment her soul was enduring at that moment. Despite his calm exterior, a fleeting sense of pity washed over him. However, he knew that since Louise was determined to uncover the truth, she must also be prepared to face its harsh realities. "I'm sorry, Louise," Atticus said, turning to face her with a composed demeanor. "The name you just mentioned." He paused, knowing that both he and Kingsley had memorized the extensive list of stowaways provided by the Aurors. They both recognized that the name Louise had unexpectedly revealed was from that list. "Does it hold any special significance?" he inquired. Louise did not respond to Atticus's question. Instead, she fixed her gaze on him, her eyes devoid of the previous shyness and allure, now replaced by an unfamiliar coldness. "The magic at Fraser is pursuing exists, doesn't it?" she demanded, her fists clenched tightly and her shoulders trembling slightly. Her voice was firm as she implored, "Please answer my question, Mr. Blaine." End of this chapter. Chapter 778, The Potential for Greatness. "The magic Fraser is after is real, right?" The question came from a muggle girl, her face pale and almost translucent in the white sunlight. Atticus Blaine raised his hand to halt Kingsley, who was about to intervene. He stepped forward, ready to speak, but was interrupted by a sudden scream from Louise at the door. "Don't move," Louise shouted, her voice trembling as she staggered back a few steps. "Don't move," she repeated, her voice softer now. Her eyes were fixed on Atticus Blaine, standing at the intersection of darkness and light. The man who had once intrigued her now seemed terrifying and strange. "Answer my question." Her voice was weak but laced with hysteria. Atticus paused, blinking before he opened his arms and let them fall naturally. His deep voice carried a soothing power. "Everything is as you see it, Louise," he said simply, though the words held more than just an apology. "As I see it?" Louise's gaze shifted to the small sticks held by Atticus and Kingsley. Moments ago, they had used those sticks to perform various miracles. Her eyes reddened, and she smiled, a sad, self-mocking smile. She laughed at her own foolishness. Her brother had once insisted that magic existed, but she dismissed it as Fraser's wishful thinking. She laughed at her naivety. She had trusted a man she barely knew and followed him to another country to uncover the truth about Fraser's death. Despite Atticus's warnings that this was beyond her reach, none of it seemed to matter anymore. "Magic," Louise murmured, her eyes finally leaving the stick in Atticus's hand to meet his rare purple eyes. "Does it really exist? Why do people never know? Is the government covering up for people like you?" Her voice was strained, her breathing heavy. "Atticus Blaine, you can choose not to answer my questions, or you can leave my body in this country. You must be able to do that easily, right? But if you don't answer and don't kill me, I will expose you when I return to London. I believe you don't want things to turn out that way, do you?" Her threat was so feeble that Kingsley felt a pang of pity. This pure muggle girl had no idea what wizards were capable of. The calm, unwavering light in Atticus's eyes showed he had faced this situation before. Despite Louise's kindness to him the previous night, her current look of hatred did not surprise him. He felt no blame. Her reaction was only natural. "All right, let me think about how to answer your question, Louise." Atticus smiled, contemplating before speaking calmly. "The Muggle government, even your government, did not cover up for us. I mean, us wizards. As far as I know, in the Muggle government, the only one aware of the wizarding world is the Prime Minister." Muggles. Wizards. Atticus Blaine did not elaborate, but Louise inferred that Muggles referred to those unaware of magic, while wizards were those capable of wielding it. Some countries in the world that you are familiar with, oh, not all, have their own magical civilization. The wizards in these civilizations have their own government, which we generally call the Ministry of Magic. Each magical civilization forms part of the International Federation of Wizards. This organization once, the world's magical civilization enacted a law. Even today, despite the diminished prestige of this federation, the law remains a guiding principle for the ministries of magic across various countries. "What is it?" Louise asked, her voice trembling with a thirst for knowledge. The breeze tousled her slightly dull hair as she grappled with the shattering of her worldview in the past few minutes. Despite this, her curiosity about the mysterious magical world remained unquenched. "The Wizarding Statute of Secrecy," Atticus Blaine replied calmly. "This law has been controversial since its inception, with many attempting to overturn it. However, the dominant voices in the wizarding communities worldwide continue to support it. The ministries of magic in various countries consider any attempt to challenge this law a serious offense. It draws an insurmountable line for all who possess magical abilities. They cannot reveal the existence of magic to Muggles." Atticus paused, adding, "This law was enacted to protect the safety of both the Muggle and wizarding worlds." "It answers your earlier question, Louise. The behavior of wizards is strictly governed by the Wizarding Secrecy Act." Louise pondered the implications of this act, questioning whether it truly served the interests of both wizards and Muggles. She realized that Atticus Blaine's actions had undoubtedly violated this seemingly absurd law. "But you used magic in front of me, didn't you?" Louise challenged, her gaze fixed on Atticus. "You broke your own laws. A law cannot regulate every action, whether intentional or unintentional, Louise," Atticus replied with a smile, though he withheld the specifics of any remedy. "But we have ways to address such situations." "Why did you do it?" Louise asked instinctively. "If this law is so important, why take the risk with me? You know the people who killed Fraser are also wizards. Continuing the investigation will surely expose magic. You could have avoided such trouble, right?" "Isn't this what you wanted, Louise?" Atticus's faint smile made Louise's breath catch, her anger simmering. He sighed softly, his tone gentle. "As you said, Louise, the person who died was your brother. You have the right to know the truth about his death and the group responsible. Even if this right is fleeting, I believe this is why the Wizarding Secrecy Act has been accepted and enforced by the Ministries of Magic, despite criticism, to maintain respect for Muggles." Kingsley couldn't help but glance at Atticus, admiration swelling within him. Powerful wizards are common, but great wizards are rare. A great wizard must possess great ideas. For many years, the only wizard deemed great was Albus Dumbledore. Yet, from what Atticus had just said, Kingsley sincerely believed that Atticus had the potential to transition from powerful to great. Respect for Muggles. When Atticus's solemn words reached her ears, Louise felt her anger subside. Magic and secrecy often suggest that wizards, with their ability to cast spells, form a privileged class. They believe Muggles are unworthy of glimpsing their unpredictable world, thus concealing the existence of magic. If wizards are human, then like any group, they include both good and evil individuals. Fraser's experience proved this. It is impossible for everyone to maintain a high degree of self-control, which is not conducive to preventing miraculous magic from causing harm. Ordinary people are protected by strict laws that restrain the behavior of wizards. This serves as a safeguard for those who do not understand magic, Louise mused. Her thoughts were interrupted when the usually reticent Kingsley spoke unexpectedly. "I'm afraid you don't know, Louise," Kingsley said in a low, hoarse voice. "Atticus Blaine is well known in the European magical community. Many wizards consider him the most powerful wizard in the current world's magical civilization. He is also the vice president of the International Federation of Wizards. Kingsley paused, his gaze fixed on Louise, who was visibly stunned. He continued in a somber tone, "He is willing to lead you in investigating the truth about Fraser's death, and has even taken the initiative to reveal magic to you, all to protect your right to know. So, Angus Aeschylus, why did you mention this name, ye see?" End of this chapter. Chapter 779. For Gold? Vice President of the International Federation of Wizards, the most powerful wizard of our time? Louise stared at the gentle-looking Atticus Blaine, her eyes wide with shock. Although she wasn't a wizard in the magical world, she could easily grasp the significance of these titles, thanks to her exceptional analytical and logical abilities. Comparing it to her own world, she understood that such positions were akin to the highest echelons of social organizations. It was astounding. Atticus Blaine was an extraordinary young man, but how had he achieved such heights at such a young age? If wizards didn't have ways to maintain their youthful appearance, and if Atticus's age matched his looks, it was truly incredible. "Oh, I don't usually like to brag about these titles," Atticus shrugged, showing no hint of arrogance. He maintained a calm smile. "Actually, I usually work at a magic school, and I'm more accustomed to being called Professor Blaine." "You also have a magic school?" Louise blurted out. "Like Hermione Granger?" "That's right," Atticus nodded appreciatively. Louise's sharp mind was evident. His smile faded, and his eyes grew somber. "She is my student, and the package was sent by Fraser, almost under my nose. It wasn't a bomb inside, but an evil curse. She was attacked and is currently receiving treatment in a British magical hospital. As her professor, I bear the responsibility for my student's safety. I must personally uncover the mastermind behind this incident and ensure justice for her." The Academy of Magic, the hospital of the wizarding world. Louise felt a sense of awe. She realized that the magical world, unknown to most, had reached a level of advanced civilization far from the ignorant and barbaric depictions she had seen in literature and films. Observing the behavior of Atticus and Kingsley, she understood they weren't the type to hide in the shadows, fearing exposure or persecution. Gradually, the anger Louise felt from being deceived began to dissipate, especially after Kingsley revealed Atticus Blaine's identity in the magical world. Women's emotions can be complex. Learning about the strict wizard secrecy law and realizing that a prominent figure like Atticus had violated it for her sake, she felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. "I'm sorry," Louise murmured, unsure how to justify her earlier anger. She pursed her lips, sounding a bit timid. "My brother hurt your student." "They are all victims, Louise, and our duty is to seek justice for them," Atticus said solemnly, his penetrating gaze understanding the emotions behind Louise's shame. "It's natural for you to feel anger towards the magical world and my existence. After all, some rogue wizards were responsible for your brother's death, and—" Atticus paused. "These dark wizards are conducting human experiments on muggles. This is an absolute taboo. I failed to foresee their actions, and I am indeed accountable." "This isn't your fault, Mr. Blaine," Kingsley interjected fairly. "You and Dumbledore usually focus on teaching at Hogwarts and rarely involve yourselves in the missteps of the International Federation of Wizards. If blame is to be assigned, it should be directed at the Italian Ministry of Magic and Vip Dregern. This is undoubtedly their doing." Atticus waved his hand, interrupting Kingsley. "That's a matter for later, Kingsley. Our immediate task is to find this group and understand their motives." "Why did they choose Miss Granger?" Atticus Blaine's eyes met Louise's once more, and she knew what he was about to ask. She bit her lip, gathering the courage to respond. "I don't know him personally. I only heard about him from Valeria. She was a lovely girl who lived in London for a while. When she found out I was from London, she was very enthusiastic, and we talked a lot about the different customs and habits of London and Bologna. I remember she mentioned having a boyfriend who was also part of the Magic Society, and his name was Angus Aeschylus." Louise took a deep breath, her expression showing the strain of recalling these details. "I had forgotten about it until I saw his name on your list last night. It seemed familiar, and then I saw Valeria's father and heard the young man's laughter." What we know is that Angus Aeschylus went to Berlin, Mr. Blaine. Kingsley's eyes sharpened. And he went alone. It's possible he has accomplices, Atticus mused. They might leave the UK separately, but there's no doubt we need to head to Berlin, and it might just be the three of us. Kingsley, it's not feasible for your team to enter Berlin simultaneously. A group of Aurors from the British Ministry of Magic would be too conspicuous. Even if the Dark Wizards don't notice, the German Ministry of Magic might, and that could lead to a serious diplomatic incident. I have some connections in the underground magic world here, and we can smuggle out directly. Kingsley listened intently, but when Atticus mentioned his connections, the corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. Why did Atticus Blaine have such deep ties in the European underground magic world? Atticus, noticing Kingsley's reaction, smiled at Louise. Bringing you along was a wise decision, Louise, he said, though his expression remained tense. Suddenly, a memory flashed in Atticus's mind, causing his smile to freeze and his eyebrows to shoot up. You must know that the goblins who secured the rights to broadcast the tournament opened a betting pool in Paris on who would win the Tri-Wizard tournament. A group of Germans planned to wager a large sum of gold on the Minerva Academy's tall girl not finishing the rest of the competition. The amount they were betting was substantial. This was what Ludo Bagman had told him before the Yule Ball. At the time, Ludo, a hopeless gambler, had tried to recruit him into the scheme. When that failed, he asked to borrow money, which Atticus also refused. He hadn't thought much of it then, assuming it was just a group hoping for an upset. But according to Ludo, these people were from Germany. Atticus didn't know the exact amount the Germans were betting, but Ludo Bagman was no novice, and the sum he mentioned was significant. Why were the Germans so confident that Hermione wouldn't complete the next challenge, rather than betting on her succumbing to its dangers? These were two entirely different concepts. The Germans wouldn't make such a bet unless they were absolutely certain. In the dimly lit room, Atticus's thoughts sent a chill through the air. The temperature in the cold room rose quickly, and Kingsley and Louise, noticing the change, stared at Atticus in astonishment. Could this group have targeted Hermione for money? The idea seemed implausible, yet it lingered in Atticus's mind. Were they the same people responsible for the other attacks? Fraser? If it's truly just for the gold, then this approach is utterly foolish. End of chapter. Chapter 780, The Unpardonable Sin. In order to extract more gold from the market opened by the goblins, would they really go so far as to harm Hermione? If that truly is their intention, then this group can only be described as incredibly foolish. Not only would Hogwarts undoubtedly investigate the incident thoroughly, but Atticus Blaine also trusts in his and Dumbledore's reputations to carry some weight. Risking everything for mere gold is beyond reckless. Considering Hermione's supporters within the British wizarding community and across Europe, the attack on her has been kept under wraps for now. However, if the issue remains unresolved, the news will inevitably leak. The Goblins' intelligence network is intricate, having infiltrated every facet of wizard society. Once they catch wind of this, they will undoubtedly react. Freezing the betting funds would be the least of their actions. The goblins will also seek out these greedy wizards who disrupt the rules and teach them a lesson. Atticus sat in silence, his mind racing with thoughts. Logically, none of this made sense. The organization uncovered by Fraser's investigation clearly wields significant power in Muggle society. Atticus couldn't believe that Mr. Pastore, driven by desperation over his daughter's disappearance, would donate all his assets. It's more likely that the wealth was secretly transferred. This suggests that the gang has no shortage of means to accumulate wealth. Unless, of course, these are two entirely separate groups. Atticus's face remained impassive, yet the intensity in his eyes was intimidating. Even without intending to, the pressure he exuded was suffocating for Louise. She retreated until she was over 30 feet from the door, finally able to breathe easier. Under the sunlight, clutching her chest and staring at his piercing purple eyes, Louise turned pale and gasped, finally comprehending the power of this unique group of wizards. Kingsley, unable to withstand the intense aura emanating from Atticus, backed away, pressing his back against the wall. His eyes were filled with panic as he watched Atticus Blaine, whose hair swayed slightly. Kingsley glanced at Louise, who was inching closer, and understood the gravity of Atticus's words. "What about you, Mr. Blaine?" Kingsley asked solemnly. Atticus replied with equal gravity. "First of all, Mr. Onisto Pastore." "Should we approach Ludo Bagman or Bana?" Kingsley inquired. "I have some new clues," Atticus continued. "I'm not sure yet if they're related to this incident, but I need to confirm. I need you to do something." "Kingsley, our plans may need to change." Atticus demonstrated remarkable control over his power. As he turned, the oppressive atmosphere in the room dissipated, though his voice still carried a commanding weight that made Kingsley's chest tighten. Kingsley nodded respectfully, his voice deep and steady. "After that, take Louise to Berlin and wait for me." Kingsley blinked, suppressing his fear, and stepped forward to follow the order. "I'm afraid we can't leave Mr. Pastore unattended. I need you to personally escort him back to London and ensure he receives care at St. Mungo's. His condition is dire, and he requires professional treatment. Before I arrive, resist the urge to investigate further. If my suspicions are correct, there may be a base for this group there. Have you seen the magic that killed Fraser? With the Ministry of Magic's support, it would be perilous if someone discovers any clues. There are no coincidences without cause in this world, and what happened to Hermione must have a deeper reason. I will ensure his safe return to London," Atticus Blaine declared, his gaze falling upon the unconscious muggles sprawled on the ground. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus decided to seek out Ludo Bagman for more information. Ludo was relatively easy to understand, greedy for money and addicted to gambling, yet not a likely candidate for a dark wizard. Despite his good relationship with the old goblin in Paris, Atticus remained cautious of the goblin's nature and methods. He couldn't dismiss the possibility that this was a trap orchestrated by the goblin and his associates. Louise observed Atticus as he conversed with Kingsley. In the past, she would have pressed Kingsley for answers, but the recent attack had left her feeling vulnerable. Discovering the existence of the magical world and realizing that Atticus Blaine was a prominent figure within it made him seem distant and almost unreal to her. "By the way, there's a third matter," Atticus suddenly recalled after discussing 2 points. He gestured for Kingsley to step back, waved his wand, and moved Pastore aside, his eyes fixed on the floor. This wasn't the first time Pastore had struck the floor. The cement had withstood time and impact, remaining intact despite the magical disturbances. Atticus didn't wave his wand again, but instead crouched down under the curious gazes of Kingsley and Louise. His fingertips brushed the cool concrete, tracing the chaotic and irregular marks. He paused, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on the floor. "What are you doing?" Louise asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. She quickly withdrew under Kingsley's stern gaze, choosing to watch silently. "Not the path of a wizard," Atticus mused with a smile a few minutes later. "Before this monastery closed down, things were not as simple as they seemed." He exhaled deeply, understanding the seal at the cave entrance. His fingertips glowed as they traced the strange lines on the ground, and then a halo of white light burst from the floor, illuminating the dark confinement room. As the light faded, a dark hole appeared before them. The moment air began to circulate, a nauseating stench of blood and decay filled the room. Louise, peering down in surprise, was overwhelmed by the foul wind, causing her to retch and retreat to the door for fresh air. "Is this where the Magical Society once conducted research?" Kingsley, an experienced auror, was more resilient to the unpleasant odor than Louise. He merely frowned, his eyes filled with anticipation. "Can we uncover more clues from below?" "As evidence for conviction, we might find some," Atticus replied, his tone cold as he stared at the spiral staircase. "But if we're hoping to trace the dark wizards through these clues, it will be challenging. Too much time has passed, and the place has been cleaned. I suspect Mr. Pastore was brought here before, witnessing his daughter's torment below. This cruel memory has deeply scarred his soul, driving him to open this place even in his madness." Kingsley clenched his fists in response. Atticus Blaine adjusted his broad sleeves and gazed at Pastore with a mix of sympathy and anger in his eyes. He understood the twisted mentality of those criminals. They allowed Pastore to live because of their perverse nature, believing that leaving survivors would inflict even greater suffering. They derived pleasure from the destruction and torment of human souls. These people deserve to be in Azkaban for the rest of their lives, Kingsley exclaimed, his voice uncharacteristically filled with emotion. What they did to Fraser alone warrants a lifetime sentence in Azkaban. Atticus's expression was cold and stern. But that doesn't satisfy me, he replied. Kingsley, you should go down and gather some evidence. I hope that when we finally capture these individuals, they will experience the Dementor's kiss. It's a fate more fitting for the heinous crimes they've committed than simply turning them to ashes. End of this chapter.